Chapter 26. Monday, afternoon. Wiltshire, England, an ancient manor with a history of 10 centuries. In a quaint and luxurious room, there sat a well-dressed middle-aged man with long blonde hair. He is the owner of this manor, Lucius Malfoy. It's his tea time, and his habit is to read some intelligence information compiled by his subordinates at this time. Among the materials today, there was a briefing from the Aurors of the Ministry of Magic that caught his attention. As a person who holds a temporary position in the Ministry of Magic and has certain voting rights, it is easy for him to obtain such internal briefings. The reason why this briefing interested him was that it involved a place, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. When Lucius Malfoy saw the name Hogwarts, the image of Dumbledore's gray beard immediately appeared in his mind. Why does an old man who has lived for so long always occupy the position of principal? Have you never thought about making way for young people? Lucius said similar words more than once in private or semi-public occasions. The content of today's briefing is roughly as follows. Many wizards have reported that their children who attend Hogwarts have mentioned in letters that there was a violent explosion in the Forbidden Forest of Hogwarts last Friday night, but the school did not give clear explanations. There was a violent explosion, and it was deliberately concealed. There must be something wrong here. The lax management of the school has put the majority of students in danger. This is the dereliction of duty of the principal. Lucius Malfoy, who had been working hard to remove Dumbledore from the position of principal, naturally keenly captured the value of this information and could not help but reveal a knowing smile on his lips. Then, he called his butler and asked, "Is there any news about Hogwarts recently?" "There's no special news," the butler said, paused, and continued, "One little thing. I heard someone say that Hagrid was seen selling things in Diagon Alley recently. A precious venom, and the body materials of some dark creatures." "Venom? Dark creature?" "Plus the explosion in the Forbidden Forest. Wow, what is our dear Professor Dumbledore doing?" Although Lucius couldn't think of a so he came, but it didn't stop him from feeling that there was something fishy about it. Anyway, causing trouble for Dumbledore is something he is happy to do. Thinking of this, Lucius stood up and said to the housekeeper, "Help me contact the other directors of the school. I think we need to send someone to investigate what happened in the school. Well, everything is for the sake of those young wizards. Safety." Time passed quickly, and it was Tuesday in a blink of an eye. Qin Yu has been in a good mood recently. Hagrid's trip to Diagon Alley was quite smooth. Not only did he complete the first phase of the Venom transaction, but he also sold the arms, legs, and eyeballs of the Acromantula for a good price. At least, Qin Yu is satisfied with those prices. The progress this time is quite considerable, allowing Qin Yu and the twin brothers to take another small step forward on the road to becoming capitalists in the magical world. A good start is the first step to success. Qin Yu is full of expectations for the future. At this time, they were taking flying lessons. Their teacher, Mrs. Hooch, asked them to practice hovering on their broomsticks, and Qin Yu wandered around in the sky on his own broomstick. Thinking of the joy, he couldn't help but do a difficult figure 8 flying around and experience the feeling of racing in the air. "What are you doing? Quick, go away." At this moment, Elvis's voice sounded not far away. Qin Yu looked back and found several Slytherin boys flying around him, and Elvis was swaying on his broomstick because he was nervous. "Elvis, the sky doesn't belong to you. We can fly wherever we want. Do you care?" Jerome said in a mocking tone. "Yes, we can fly however we want. You have nothing to do with it." The minions followed. Several people were talking sarcastically, and Elvis was flying even more unsteadily. The broomstick under his crotch seemed to be out of control and about to fall down. Just then, crack! Jerome was suddenly hit by something. He covered his butt and let out a scream. "Who hit me?" Jerome looked around angrily. Then, he saw Qin Yu not far away, holding the wooden sword and looking here with a smile. Although Qin Yu failed to find a way to fly with the sword, he still carried his wooden sword during flying lessons, reflecting the stubbornness of 2 young men in one match. At this time, this wooden sword came in handy. Qin Yu just went to the ground to pick up a few stones, then flew into the air again, threw a stone, and used this wooden sword to knock it away and hit it accurately. Jerome's A****. Seeing Qin Yu's wooden sword and the stone he took out from his pocket, how could Jerome not know who the murderer was who attacked his butt? "Did you hit me just now?" Jerome said angrily. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, my hand slipped," Qin Yu said with a smile. "Humph, is it enough to just say sorry?" Jerome said viciously. "Advertisement, then what do you want?" "I said I didn't mean it. Do you want to hit me?" "Let me declare first that I have no intention of provoking," Qin Yu said innocently. Seeing him like this made Jerome angry. As a member of Slytherin, Jerome had long disliked Qin Yu, especially since this guy seemed to get along well with the teachers, which made him feel even more unbalanced. At this time, Jerome was attacked for no reason by Qin Yu, and the guy had a mean look on his face. Jerome's old and new hatreds instantly surged into his heart. You are seeking death. Jerome held down the wooden handle of the broomstick, leaned down, and instantly accelerated towards Qin Yu's direction. And those few minions had already disliked this Gryffindor guy. When they saw Jerome rushing towards him, they also sped up and chased after him. Qin, be careful, Elvis warned loudly. Qin saved him at a critical moment, but put himself in crisis. Elvis was filled with gratitude and worry and almost burst into tears. Don't worry, I just want to stretch my muscles and play with them. As Qin Yu said this, he began to lower his body and rush towards Jerome. The two of them were flying towards each other at high speed, and they were about to collide. At the critical moment, Qin Yu suddenly turned sideways and flew past Jerome. And at the moment when they missed each other, Qin Yu swung out the big sword in his hand and slapped Jerome hard on the butt. Crack! Jerome let out a scream filled with humiliation. Qin, I'm going to kill you, Jerome said hysterically after receiving this blow. However, in the next 5 minutes, instead of getting revenge, Jerome was chased and beaten by Qin Yu in the sky. Qin Yu got closer and whipped the guy directly with his wooden sword. Then he distanced himself and used his wooden sword to knock away stones for a long-range attack. After all the trouble, Jerome's minions had already fled, leaving only Jerome with his hair disheveled in the sky, howling in pain. Qin, I'm not done with you. Are you threatening me? I'm going to kill you. They shout and kill at every turn, which really scares me. My father will not let you go. Hey, who is your dad? The Minister of Magic? Oh, can you please stop spanking me all the time? Give me a reason. I was wrong. I will never bully Elvis again. Please stop. As time went by, Jerome's voice changed from tough at the beginning to stern in the middle, and finally to a tearful plea. Qin, what are you doing? Mrs. Hooch's voice sounded. She had just walked away for a while to arrange the Quidditch selection. Unexpectedly, when she came back, she saw Qin Yu chasing Jerome in the sky. Upon hearing this, Qin Yu put the wooden sword back into the bag on his back and landed steadily on the ground on his broomstick. Teacher, we are playing a game, Qin Yu said seriously. No, he's crazy. Right, we are playing a game. Jerome originally wanted to complain, but Qin Yu gave him a cold look and immediately changed his tune. Moreover, the root of the matter is that they bullied Elvis. If they want to break up, no one will benefit. Mrs. Hooch looked back and forth between their faces. She didn't know what kind of character these naughty kids were. After a while, Mrs. Hooch said coldly, for disturbing the order of the class, 10 points will be deducted from Gryffindor and Slytherin. Qin Yu couldn't help but sigh after hearing this, and Jerome instantly turned into a bitter look. At this moment, Qin Yu saw a middle-aged man with long blonde hair passing nearby, accompanied by Dumbledore. After seeing the man's appearance clearly, especially the snake-headed cane in his hand, Qin Yu recognized the man's identity. He is Lucius Malfoy, Brother Drag's father. Why did this old boy come to Hogwarts? Qin Yu couldn't help but frown. Chapter 27. Professor Dumbledore, isn't the school's discipline a bit worrying? There are actually blatant fights in class, Lucius said quietly. Mr. Malfoy always enjoyed giving Dumbledore eye drops. It is the nature of young people to love to play. Lucius, I remember you were very naughty when you were in school. For this, Professor McGonagall deducted points from your college. Dumbledore looked at Lucius with a smile. Malfoy, that was all in the past. Now I understand that as a student, it is better to abide by the rules, Lucius said seriously. There was no way, facing an old man who had lived for hundreds of years, Lucius really had a lot of dirty information from his school days in Dumbledore's hands. There was obviously no need to go into this topic further. Lucius continued. This first-year Gryffindor student seems to be very talented in flying. What is his name? He just asked casually, pretending to be concerned so as to change the subject. His name should be Qin Yu. I just learned that he is pretty good at flying, Dumbledore said casually. Then, he led Lucius Malfoy to his office. Obviously, Dumbledore didn't want to mention Qin Yu more. Looking at Dumbledore and Lucius Malfoy walking in the corridor not far away, Qin Yu couldn't help but feel a little confused. Yes, he knew that Malfoy was a real Death Eater and a villain. He had escaped being imprisoned in Azkaban by lying about being controlled by the Imperius Curse and his family's power. In the future, the Malfoy family will immediately return to the Death Eater camp when Lord Voldemort returns. However, at this time, Qin Yu could do nothing to help Lucius Malfoy. I would like to ask, didn't Dumbledore know about Malfoy's duplicity? Even this recognized great wizard did not touch this boy. There must be many reasons and concerns. Since he cannot be defeated for the time being, Qin Yu no longer thinks too much. The most important thing now is to improve his strength so that he can protect himself and even fight when the Lord returns. In the next flying lesson, Qin Yu practiced the movements taught by Mrs. Hooch honestly and did not cause any trouble. Besides, I'm not a troublemaker. I just couldn't help but teach that boy Jerome a lesson, Qin Yu muttered in his heart. However, he always felt that he seemed to have a bit of a temper today. If he went by the usual rules, he would most likely not beat Jerome for 5 minutes, at most 1 minute. So why did it last so long this time? Thinking of this, Qin Yu looked at Jerome subconsciously. The red-haired boy saw Qin Yu's gaze and immediately trembled. He almost didn't fall off the broomstick. Then, he quickly twisted the broom handle and flew to the side, keeping a sufficient distance from Qin Yu. Professor McGonagall, I just discovered a talent. Charlie Weasley caught up with Professor McGonagall in the corridor and said excitedly. At this time, Professor McGonagall had just come out of his office and was about to walk in a certain direction. Oh, what kind of talent? Professor McGonagall stopped and asked in confusion. Advertisement. Professor McGonagall likes Charlie very much, mainly because she is a senior Quidditch fan, and Charlie is the captain and seeker of Gryffindor's Quidditch team, and he is quite good. Unfortunately, Charlie will graduate next summer, and Professor McGonagall is a little worried about the replacement of the old and new Quidditch teams after these graduates leave. Vice Captain Oliver Wood is a trustworthy person, but he is responsible for the goalkeeper. The Quidditch team still lacks an excellent seeker like Charlie and a batter who dares to fight. I found a talent suitable for being a batsman, Charlie said excitedly. Sure enough, the reason he came to find him was related to Quidditch. Professor McGonagall thought to herself. Really then, who is this person? Charlie? Professor McGonagall asked. Qin from the 1st grade. Charlie said the name of this talent. Huh. Professor McGonagall was stunned. Charlie thought she didn't know Qin Yu, so he continued. You don't know how talented Qin is in Quidditch. Just when he was in class, I saw him riding a broomstick chasing someone in the sky. The boy from Letling was flying and could swing a wooden stick for precise strikes. Charlie thought it was a wooden stick. Isn't this a natural hitter? Note, there are 7 players in a Quidditch team, divided into goalkeeper, chaser, batter, and seeker. The batter is responsible for using the bat in his hand to knock the bludger away to protect his own team. Players will hit the bludger towards the enemy player to interfere with the enemy's goal. In short, it is a very violent functional position. After listening to Charlie's words, Professor McGonagall just felt a headache. She thought to herself, how could I not know this child, even more than you know? Charlie, I must remind you that the fight he had with his classmates in the flying class just now was a very undesirable behavior, and he has already been punished by deducting points, Professor McGonagall said sternly. So, you also saw Qin's performance? Charlie said happily. Is this the point? Professor McGonagall sweated. Ahem, yes, it's wrong to not follow classroom disciplines, Charlie said quickly and seriously. Immediately, he put on a smile again and said to Professor McGonagall expectantly, Then do you agree with him joining the Gryffindor Quidditch team? Charlie, I must tell you that although Qin has certain talents, he may not be a good choice, Professor McGonagall said meaningfully. Why? You said before that a batsman needs 3 points of talent and 7 points of courage, and I saw exactly these 2 qualities in Qin. To be honest, I originally wanted George and Fred to try us for the selection of batsmen. You know that the 2 of them are quite motivated, but after seeing Qin's performance, I found that those 2 boys can only be used as substitutes, Charlie said of his 2 younger brothers without hesitation. There are some things that I can't tell you in detail, but if you really insist, I will consider letting Qin join the Quidditch team, Professor McGonagall said after pondering for a moment. Professor McGonagall was of course concerned about Qin Yu's power of silence, but she didn't want to stop the child from living a normal life because of it. This was a very confusing choice. Great. Charlie high-fived happily. I just want to think about it, and there is no final decision. This matter is not as simple as you think. Professor McGonagall poured cold water on him first, and then said, Okay, I already know the matter. Yes, I have something to do now. Your principal Dumbledore has encountered a difficult person. I have to go over and see if I can help him in any way. Then you go and do your work first. Goodbye, Professor McGonagall. Charlie waved goodbye to her. Goodbye, Charlie. After Professor McGonagall said this to Charlie, she hurried to the principal's office. There is another chapter today. Okay. Chapter 28. Elvis, pass me that sandwich, thank you. Qin Yu said to his roommate Elvis at the lunch table. After Elvis handed him a sandwich as instructed, Qin Yu took some more food, found a plate to put on, and stood up to leave. Qin, where are you going? Elvis asked curiously. I'm going to find a friend. Well, it should be someone who can become a friend, Qin Yu said with a smile. Then, before Elvis could ask any more questions, he hurried away with a plate of food. Watching Qin Yu's leaving figure, Elvis tilted his head and thought about who he was going to meet. He didn't know if he recognized him. Thinking that Qin Yu was so good at making friends at school, Elvis couldn't help but feel envious and regarded him as his role model. What Qin Yu wanted to see was not a human being to be precise, but a house elf. That's right, when Lucius Malfoy came to Hogwarts this time, he brought his house elf Dobby with him. Rather than meeting Lucius, Qin Yu was more happy to meet Dobby, the little elf who longed for freedom. In this magical world, the deaths of several characters have made Qin Yu, a casual fan, feel uneasy, such as Snape, Dumbledore, and Dobby the elf. Qin Yu was deeply moved by the elf's desire for freedom, loyalty to friends, and bravery in the face of danger. Therefore, he came to the auditorium as soon as get out of class was over to get some food, and then went straight to the principal's office. Sure enough, Qin Yu saw the elf standing against the pillar in the corridor outside the principal's office. However, besides Dobby the elf, he also saw Professor McGonagall, who was stepping into the office. After Professor McGonagall entered and closed the door of the office, Qin Yu strolled over and saw Dobby up close. The elf has big eyes and pointed ears. He is wearing the iconic pillowcase-like blouse and looks very thin. Hi, sir. My name is Qin Yu. What's your name? Qin Yu walked over and said straight to the point. Dobby, sir. My name is Dobby, the elf said hurriedly. However, Dobby immediately looked at Qin Yu in astonishment and said in disbelief, What did you just call Dobby? Sir? You called Dobby, sir? Qin Yu smiled slightly. Are you not a gentleman, but a lady? No, Dobby is not a lady. That's not what Dobby meant. Dobby just wanted to say that it was so surprising that you called Dobby, sir. No one has ever called Dobby that way. The elf said nonchalantly. Then, someone will call you that in the future. Qin Yu's nose felt slightly sore when he said this. Yes, what this elf pursues his whole life is just respect from others. But Dobby is just a lowly house elf. Dobby lowered his head and said, I think a person's nobility comes from his kind and brave heart, rather than his origin. Are you right, Dobby? Qin Yu said warmly. A kind and brave heart? Does Dobby have such a heart? Dobby murmured after hearing this. Yes, I believe you have it. Qin Yu looked at Dobby's big eyes with a smile and said sincerely, Dobby has a kind and brave heart. Thank you for saying that. Dobby has never been so happy as he is today. Dobby's master always said that house elves are lowly. No, Dobby can't speak ill of his master. Bad Dobby. Bad Dobby. Seeing this self-pua house elf scolding himself and hitting the wall, Qin Yu couldn't help but sigh and thought to himself, the house elf's road to liberation is really long and arduous. Qin Yu couldn't stop him even if he wanted to. Advertisement. When the elf Dobby stopped tossing himself, Qin Yu handed the food over and said, Dobby, it's lunchtime now. Do you want something to eat? These are our school specialties. They are very delicious. Dobby stood on tiptoe and looked at the food on the plate. He couldn't help swallowing, but finally shook his head and said, Thank you. Dobby can't eat it? Why? Qin Yu asked with some confusion. Dobby cannot eat without his master's permission, the elf explained. There is also this rule. Qin Yu was a little stunned. He knew that the elf could not wear clothes given by others, because giving clothes represented the termination of the master-servant contract, but he did not expect that even food was not allowed. However, after thinking about it, he realized that if the elf could eat freely, he would not be as skinny as he is now. This realization made Qin Yu feel sympathy for the house elf's life experience again. Sir, are you planning to give these to Dobby? Dobby tried to ask. Not entirely. I actually want to eat with you. After all, I haven't had lunch yet, Qin Yu said matter-of-factly. Then, Dobby can eat with you. Dobby can look at and smell the food if you don't mind, the elf said carefully. Of course I don't mind, Qin Yu said with a smile. So Qin Yu found a place to sit down in the corridor and chatted with Dobby while eating. You can only watch but not eat. Although it is a bit cruel, Dobby is very happy because some of the food on the plate belongs to him. he just can't eat it. Dobby, what are you doing in school today? Qin Yu was quite curious about this. Master can't tell others without an explanation. Since Qin wants to know, Dobby will tell you. Master said that there was an explosion at Hogwarts. It must be Professor Dumbledore who has some secret. The Master came here this time to cause trouble for Professor Dumbledore and make him less secure in his position as principal. The Master hates Professor Dumbledore very much. Dobby, he said bad things about his master again. Dobby can't do this? Dobby rambled on about what he knew. Oh, that's it. Qin Yu nodded thoughtfully after hearing this. It seems that Lucius Malfoy knew about the explosion in the Forbidden Forest. However, he obviously did not know the truth of the matter, let alone that it was related to Qin Yu. Otherwise, he would not have thought that it was Deng Yu. Burrito's secret. Thinking of this, Qin Yu felt somewhat relieved. Qin, you should also eat Dobby's share of food. The elf looked at Qin Yu expectantly. Okay. Although Qin Yu felt a little full, he couldn't resist the hospitality. The elf watched the food being eaten up, feeling happier than eating the food himself. Professor Dumbledore, I heard that some students were injured after the explosion in the Forbidden Forest. Is this true? After chatting in the office for a while, Lucius attacked Dumbledore. This made the latter feel slightly shocked. Dumbledore originally thought that Lucius only knew about the explosion in the Forbidden Forest. In this case, he could just excuse himself by saying that he had an accident during a magic trial. Who would have thought that Lucius would even know that a student was injured? So he had to find another reason. However, Lucius obviously didn't know about Qin Yu. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so calm when he saw Qin Yu just now. Thinking of this, Dumbledore exchanged a subtle glance with Professor McGonagall. The two had been partners for many years, and Professor McGonagall could of course roughly understand what the principal meant. Lucius, it is true that a student entered the Forbidden Forest by mistake, but he was not seriously injured, Dumbledore said calmly. Oh, so what happened to this explosion? The school directors sent me here this time, just to get an explanation. Lucius pulled out the school board's flag. No problem. We can go to the Forbidden Forest together later, and I'll explain the whole story to you. Professor Dumbledore nodded. Chapter 29. After chatting with Dobby for a while, Qin Yu stood up and left the corridor before the principal and Lucius came out. Based on the analysis of the information learned from Dobby, Qin Yu knew that it would be better not to draw too much attention from Lucius. After all, the explosion in the Acromantula cave was closely related to his own obscurus power. If Lucio was allowed to when Hughes discovers this secret, it will only cause a lot of trouble. When saying goodbye to Dobby, the house elf said in an expectant and timid tone, Qin, can Dobby see Qin again? Can Dobby still eat with Qin? No, Dobby didn't ask Qin. In doing so, Dobby is just thinking wildly. Dobby, of course we will meet again. Moreover, I believe you will be free one day. Qin Yu smiled firmly at Dobby. Even if Harry Potter fails to get Dobby to leave the Malfoy family, I will find a way to help Dobby get free. Qin Yu secretly thought in his heart. Thank you, Qin. Dobby is very happy to meet Qin today. Dobby said with red eyes. I'm also happy to meet Dobby. Qin Yu replied. At this time, he noticed footsteps coming from the office. Qin Yu waved to Dobby, picked up the empty tray, and trotted away. Not long after Qin Yu left, the door to the principal's office opened, and Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, and Lucius walked out. After Professor Dumbledore came out of the room, he stepped sideways without leaving a trace, blocking Lucius' line of sight because old Deng caught a glimpse of Qin Yu's figure leaving in a hurry not far away. According to Dumbledore's understanding of Qin Yu, he knew that the child was probably near the principal's office just now. Especially when he saw the house elf's eyes looking at the direction Qin Yu left, Dumbledore was even more determined. Idea. Let's go, Lucius, Dumbledore said, walking in the other direction of the corridor. Lucius was slightly startled, because in his impression, it was a long way to go to the Forbidden Forest from this direction. However, he hadn't returned to school for a while, and he didn't know much about the Forbidden Forest, so he didn't express any doubts. Okay, Professor Dumbledore. Lucius said this and kicked the dazed elf Dobby hard, telling him to follow him quickly. Lucius, are you really not going to have lunch before going to the Forbidden Forest? Dumbledore asked again. Business matters are important. I'm not here to dine at Hogwarts, Professor Dumbledore, Lucius said coldly and arrogantly. That's right, you were appointed by the directors to come here to investigate the problem, Dumbledore joked. Although Qin Yu tried his best to avoid meeting Lucius Malfoy, it backfired. Not long after he returned to the Gryffindor dormitory, Prefect Charlie Weasley came over and informed him that he should go to the Forbidden Forest. Charlie, do you know why I went to the Forbidden Forest? Qin Yu followed Charlie and asked, pretending to be confused. It seems that a big shot has come here to investigate something. Professor McGonagall asked me to inform you to cooperate and explain the situation. After saying this, Charlie suddenly thought of something, and then said, by the way, Professor McGonagall specially asked I told you not to be afraid. She said that although it is illegal to enter the Forbidden Forest by mistake, you are lucky as long as you are safe. Just be careful not to make similar mistakes next time. After listening to what Charlie relayed, Qin Yu instantly understood what Professor McGonagall was trying to convey, which was for him to classify his last experience as entering the Forbidden Forest by mistake. This is to let him unify his caliber so as not to betray others. By the way, when did you enter the Forbidden Forest by mistake? On the first day of school, Professor Dumbledore stated that the Forbidden Forest cannot be entered at will. Charlie asked Qin Yu with some confusion. Well, my pet was lost, and when I was looking for it, I accidentally entered the Forbidden Forest. Qin Yu thought of a reason. Oh, then you were too careless. You must pay attention next time, Charlie instructed. Okay, I will. Charlie, thank you for the reminder. Qin Yu thanked him. You're welcome, haha. My mother asked me to help you a lot. If you have anything to do in the future, just tell me, Charlie said with a smile. By the way, Qin Yu is quite close to the Weasley family. He met the Weasley family's eldest son Bill on his first trip to Diagon Alley, and later met Way Weasley at King's Cross Station 9 and March 4th. The Sly family. To this day, Qin Yu still often plays with the small pyramid that Bill gave him, and he put a cherry in it. It has been more than 10 days, and the cherry has not gone bad. Although he has not met Charlie very often, Qin Yu naturally feels that this big brother is relatively friendly due to these connections. The two chatted all the way and gradually became familiar with each other, especially when they talked about George and Fred. There was even more topic. I didn't expect you to become friends with these two troublemakers. By the way, if they bully you, just tell me and I will definitely not let them off lightly, Charlie said sternly. Hua, this family really has the same temperament, and they all have the determination and courage to kill relatives for justice. Haha, Bill said something similar. Qin Yu couldn't help but smile. Really? It seems that my brother also has a headache for those two troublemakers. Charlie spread his hands and said, actually, George and Fred are two very good children. They just haven't learned to get along with others in a better way. I believe that if they find the direction of their efforts, everyone will be impressed, Qin Yu said solemnly. Seeing Qin Yu's serious look, Charlie confirmed that he was not talking casually. Well, I probably understand why the two of them like you, Charlie said. Of course, he didn't notice that the word Qin Yu just used to call George and Fred was children. The two chatted all the way and soon reached the edge of the Forbidden Forest, where Professor McGonagall was waiting not far away. Before entering the Forbidden Forest, Charlie whispered mysteriously, Qin, let me tell you a secret. I recommended you to join the Quidditch team to Professor McGonagall. Professor McGonagall said he would consider it, but I believe you will be a member of the Quidditch team. Wow, this is really good news, thank you, Charlie, Qin Yu said happily. This is Quidditch. Qin Yu really wants to try it and experience this sport in the magical world that has been popular for nearly 1,000 years. Okay, Charlie, you go back first, and then I will take Qin there, Professor McGonagall said to Charlie after the two approached. Well, okay, Professor McGonagall. Charlie nodded. Then, he handed Qin Yu to Professor McGonagall and returned to Hogwarts Castle. After Charlie walked away, Professor McGonagall whispered to Qin Yu, Qin, do you know what to say next? Hearing this, Qin Yu nodded and said, that day I entered the Forbidden Forest by mistake because I was looking for a pet, and then I got lost. Professor McGonagall smiled with satisfaction and added, later, when you encountered danger, when you called for help, you were heard by Professor Dumbledore who was passing by. So, Professor Dumbledore used a big move to kill those terrifying acromantulas. Qin Yu continued. Yes, thanks to Professor Dumbledore, you were not harmed. Professor McGonagall couldn't help but applaud and said with a smile. She was just worried that Charlie didn't convey her words clearly, or that little Qin Yu failed to understand her intentions, so she found an excuse to pick Qin Yu up to the acromantula's cave so that she could give the child some guidance on the way. I didn't expect this kid to be very smart, and he was so calm and composed when telling lies. Advertisement, however, Professor McGonagall then thought about it. The ability to lie seemed not a good thing, and it might cause her some trouble in the future. Of course, now is not the time to worry about this. Professor McGonagall, I thought you were lost too. Lucius appeared in front of them at some point. Professor McGonagall secretly thought that she was not worried about her coming to pick up the child, so she came here specially. Fortunately, I had quickly settled my argument with Qin Yu just now. Yes, Mr. Malfoy, it is indeed easy for people to get lost in the Forbidden Forest. Professor McGonagall followed Lucius's words and said. Lucius found that he seemed to have nothing to say. Oh, so it's you. Only then did he have time to look at Qin Yu, and he said with some surprise. Professor McGonagall and Qin Yu were both stunned when they heard this. However, neither of them made it too obvious. Professor McGonagall exchanged subtle glances with Qin Yu, and then said calmly, Mr. Malfoy, do you know this little boy? Qin Yu also showed the curiosity that a child should have, and looked at Lucius Malfoy doubtfully. How do I know him? It's just that I just walked into Hogwarts today, and saw this little boy bullying other students in class. This is really impressive. Lucius said mockingly. Although his words were strange, Professor McGonagall and Qin Yu both breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. It seems that this guy only knew Qin Yu today, and couldn't even name him. Of course, as the noble head of the Malfoy family, how could he have the energy to pay attention to the affairs of a young wizard? Following Lucius and Professor McGonagall, Qin Yu quickly arrived at the Acromantula cave. At this time, there were no corpses of the Acromantulas in the cave, except for the valuable parts taken away by Qin Yu and Hagrid. The remaining meat, internal organs, etc., were animals that had long been scavenged, eaten up. Now there are only some traces of the energy explosion and the blood stain of the Acromantula. Lucius, the person has arrived. You can ask questions. After asking, ask the child to go back early. Hogwarts has classes in the afternoon, Professor Dumbledore said to Lucius Malfoy. Okay. Lucius nodded and turned to Qin Yu. Little boy, tell me what happened that day. Remember, tell the truth. When Qin Yu heard this, he immediately became a little panicked and timid and said stammering. That day, Shrek got lost, so I looked for him everywhere. Wait, who is Shrek? Lucius interrupted Qin Yu and asked with a frown. Shrek is my pet. He is a cute mouse with big ears. He is usually very well behaved and can also step on wheels. Okay, go ahead and talk about the key points. Lucius interrupted the little boy's ramblings impatiently. Okay, let me continue. That day, I found that he was lost, so I went to look for him. Then, I got lost and I ended up here. There are many good things here. Big spiders. How scary. Each of those spiders has 8 legs and 8 eyes. I was so scared that I screamed loudly and cried. Fortunately, Professor Dumbledore appeared, and he rescued me and killed those terrible spiders. When Qin Yu said this, he had a frightened expression on his face, which clearly showed his fear and helplessness. After saying this, he bowed to Dumbledore and said gratefully, Thank you very much, Professor Dumbledore. If you hadn't appeared in time, both Shrek and I would have been in danger. You're welcome. It is our duty as teachers to protect the safety of students. Dumbledore said softly. Are you sure you didn't lie? Lucius was obviously not satisfied with what the little boy said. Before Qin Yu came, Dumbledore had actually explained the situation to Lucius. What Qin Yu said at this time basically matched what Dumbledore said. Lucius originally thought that there was something fishy about the explosion in the Forbidden Forest, but he didn't expect that it was just an ordinary rescue incident. And if the person who took action was Dumbledore, then it would not be surprising to make a big fuss. After all, Dumbledore is recognized as one of the greatest wizards in the world, or none. Why should I lie? Qin Yu looked at Lucius blankly. Lucius didn't bother to pay attention to the little boy's rhetorical question. He looked around irritably, trying to find some unusual clues, but in the end it was all in vain. At this moment, Professor Snape walked in slowly. Severus, do you carry Veritaserum with you? Lucius asked immediately. Veritaserum? Why are you bringing that thing? Of course, I can get it if you need it, Snape said expressionlessly. After hearing this, Lucius looked at the smiling Dumbledore, the solemn Professor McGonagall, and the confused little boy who couldn't be named. After a while, he finally sighed. If you don't bring it, forget it. Now that the matter has been cleared up, I can't explain it to the directors. I wonder how Professor Dumbledore plans to deal with this incident. Lucius said to Dumbledore. He originally thought it would be a big incident, but he didn't expect this to be the result of the investigation, which made him a little unwilling. But there was nothing he could do. After all, he couldn't beat Dumbledore in terms of strength. It seems that this trip to Hogwarts is destined to not yield much. Lucius thought a little frustrated. Professor McGonagall, this child is from your college. What do you think we should do with him? Dumbledore looked at Professor McGonagall and said, Although he accidentally entered the Forbidden Forest in search of pets, he violated the most stringent rules of Hogwarts after all. He could have sought help from the teacher, but he did not do so. In view of this, I think a deduction should be made. 50 points from Gryffindor, and let him undergo some labor punishment, Professor McGonagall said slowly. Got it, and deducted points. Qin Yu's mouth tightened, his eyes turned red, and he looked so aggrieved that he almost cried. After hearing this, Professor Dumbledore nodded and said, I think this kind of punishment is okay. At the same time, I will reiterate the dangers of the Forbidden Forest to all the teachers and students during dinner, so that everyone should not enter easily. Do you think we can this kind of treatment satisfy the directors, Lucius? Humph. Regarding Professor Dumbledore's dereliction of duty in school management, I will truthfully report this matter to the directors. Lucius said coldly. Of course, he could only say these cruel words. After all, this matter could not bring down Dumbledore. After saying this, Lucius ignored everyone present, shook his sleeves, and left with his snake-headed cane. Dobby, what are you doing? You're not keeping up, Lucius said angrily. Dobby secretly cast a concerned look at Qin Yu and left reluctantly. And after Lucius took his house elf away, the little boy Qin Yu, who was always worried and timid, immediately put on his signature warm smile. I will definitely bring Veritasrum with me when I chat with you later. Snape rolled his eyes and slowly left the cave. After listening to Snape's words, Professor McGonagall couldn't help but frown, because she found that Qin's acting skills were extremely proficient and easy to control, which allowed today's things to end smoothly. However, if you use this trick against the teachers at Hogwarts, they will have a headache. Thinking of this, Professor McGonagall subconsciously looked at Professor Dumbledore and found that the latter gave her a reassuring smile. Well, with the principal taking care of everything, she doesn't have to worry so much. Professor McGonagall thought so. Chapter 30. When it comes to acting skills, Qin Yu really has nothing to be proud of. Especially in front of Comrade Snape from Mission Impossible, he is just a younger brother, right? By the way, Lucius was somewhat suspicious of Qin Yu's remarks just now, but Snape's timely appearance diverted Lucius's attention, and then said that he could go get the Veritasrum at any time, acting as if nothing had happened. The clouds were calm, and the wind was gentle. Lucius thought that he had a certain ability to distinguish, so he didn't let Snape bother him and chose to believe Qin Yu's words. Furthermore, Qin Yu believed that even if Snape really went to get the Veritasrum, he would definitely do something wrong, because you can always rely on the loyalty of Comrade Severus Snape. Of course, the most important reason is that as a descendant of a noble pure-blood family, Mr. Malfoy does not bother to worry too much about a little brat and is too lazy to waste energy. In this way, Qin Yu successfully muddled through, and Malfoy could only accept Dumbledore's words, and finally left disappointed. Hagrid is the warden of the hunting ground. Didn't Mr. Malfoy ask him to explain the situation? Qin Yu asked doubtfully. Snape's appearance was very reassuring, but Qin Yu was worried about when Hagrid would suddenly appear the whole time. You can always trust Snape's acting skills, but you can also never trust Hagrid's mouth. Fortunately, Qin Yu didn't see the shadow of Uncle Hagrid until Malfoy left. Because Hagrid happened to be away for something that day, there was no need to be questioned. I also asked Hagrid to do the matter of the acromantula venom, and I have already explained this to Mr. Malfoy. After Dumbledore said this, he looked into Qin Yu's eyes and continued, So, little Qin Yu, you still need to give some of the money you earn from selling venom to the school. You have to talk to your friends about this. Let's discuss it carefully. Dumbledore originally thought that the child would be distressed when he heard that he had to hand over the profits, but Qin Yu nodded very simply and said, No problem, I can give you a promise first. We guarantee that we will hand over 10% of the profits. Give it to the school. His answer surprised both Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall. 10% profit is not a small amount, at least for a child. It is quite considerable. However, they immediately saw Qin Yu's bright smile and said slowly, So, Professor Dumbledore, we can claim that these things are specialties from Hogwarts when we sell them, right? Of course you can claim that. Dumbledore nodded subconsciously, but he quickly showed a look of understanding and scolded with a smile. You little boy, you are really shrewd. Dumbledore was a mature man and was not a stickler for the past, so he naturally understood what Qin Yu meant. Hey, it's all because of the principal's teachings. Qin Yu quickly flattered Laodang. Okay, it's over now. Go back to class quickly. Dumbledore patted Qin's shoulder and said with a smile. I'll go say hello to Hagrid first, and then rush back to Hogwarts Castle for class immediately. Qin Yu said goodbye to Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall, and ran to Hagrid's cabin. Professor Dumbledore, what did this kid mean just now? Why did he so readily agree to let the school share a portion of the profits? Professor McGonagall couldn't help but ask. She was so focused on education that she didn't know anything about business. For a while, she was a little confused about Qin Yu's purpose. Haha, Minerva, you don't understand this. He wants to use the name of the school to cheat. To make money. In this case, with the name of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the price will definitely be slightly higher. Improve it. Dumbledore said the key. Advertisement. Professor McGonagall understood immediately, sighed and said helplessly, he is indeed a child with many ideas. Being good at discovering opportunities in crises and taking advantage of situations is a very powerful ability. Just like a wise man named Sun from the East said, a talented person's qualifications and temperament are no different from others. It's just because he is good at using foreign objects, and Qin happens to have this quality, Dumbledore said to Professor McGonagall. It does make sense. After Professor McGonagall said this, she asked doubtfully, Professor Dumbledore, you seem to like to quote the words of the wise men from the East recently? I have heard you say this more than once. Past. Really? Dumbledore was stunned when he heard this, and then said with a smile, maybe it's because this Eastern kid made me pay attention to Eastern wisdom unconsciously. I have to say, the remarks of those ancient wise men are really impressive. Very inspiring. Minerva, I suggest you read those books when you have time. You will definitely gain something. Okay, I will. Professor McGonagall nodded and said calmly. The two old friends chatted and strolled back to Hogwarts. Qin Yu went to see Hagrid, firstly to assure Uncle Han that he was safe so that he would not worry about himself, and secondly, of course, to explain the sales issues of the acromantula venom and those miscellaneous parts. Our publicity strategy can be bolder, labeling all these items as produced by Hogwarts, and even add the name of Professor Snape who personally handled them. After all, he is still very famous in the field of potion research. Qin Yu said his plan. This was similar to what Professor Dumbledore had guessed, but Lao Deng didn't expect that Qin Yu would even pull Snape into trouble. Is this okay? Is it against school rules? Hagrid said worriedly. Don't worry, I have reached an agreement with Professor Dumbledore. As long as we hand over 10% of the profits to the school, we can blatantly use the Hogwarts trademark. Qin Yu smiled brightly at Hagrid. Oh, if that's the case, that's good. Hagrid also showed a happy smile. From a small businessman to a school-run enterprise, Hagrid gained some confidence. Of course, this matter was purely forced by Qin Yu, and he would definitely not be allowed to do this in the future. But let's make some money first. Okay, I'm leaving. I'm here just to tell you that if those previous customers want to make additional purchases, let's not be so anxious to make a move. It won't be too late to sell after we discuss a suitable price. Qin Yu said while he stood up and said, Well, I listened to you, Hagrid said in a low voice. After coming out of Hagrid's hut, Qin Yu ran to school. Then, he finally arrived in the classroom before Professor Binns, the teacher of the History of Magic class, emerged from the blackboard. Note: Professor Binns is a ghost who often pops out of the blackboard. During class, Qin Yu became the first student in the entire first grade class to actively raise his hand to answer questions in the History of Magic class, or maybe the entire school. After expounding on the historical significance and far-reaching impact of burning witches in the medieval Muggle world, Qin Yu was praised by Professor Binns and won a point for Gryffindor. When he heard Professor Binns say that he would be rewarded with a point, Qin Yu was almost moved to tears. Merlin's beard. So many points were deducted. I finally got 1 point to hug him back. However, the author has really read each of your comments and the source of each gift. Thank you very much for your support. I will continue to work hard. Bow and step down. Chapter 31. After Lucius left Hogwarts for a while, he asked Dobby, the house elf, to take him back to Malfoy Manor by operating. Dad, where have you been? Why did it take you so long to come back? The younger son Draco Malfoy greeted him enthusiastically. Lucius tapped Draco on the shoulder with his snakehead cane and said seriously, Have you finished all the books I asked you to read? Book? Look, read part of it. Little Malfoy immediately lowered his head with guilt. Then go back to your room and continue watching. Lucius said seriously. Okay, Dad. I know, I'll go right away. Draco immediately returned to his room obediently. Seeing his son leave so obediently, Lucius' expression softened a little. Lucius, Draco is just a child. Do you need to be so strict with him? A beautiful blonde woman came over and said in a helpless tone, Narcissa, He is our only son and the future master of the Malfoy family. How can he relax? If he can't even compare to those lowly mixed-blood wizards and mudbloods in the future, then how can he represent the glory of our sacred 28 families? Lucius said proudly, "Dear, I understand how much you attach importance to family honor. However, he is still young. When he gets to school, I believe he will become the best student in Slytherin. He will become the pride of the Malfoy family." The beautiful blonde woman also said it was Lucius's wife Narcissa Malfoy who said slowly, "Of course he will become the best student in Slytherin. However, this is not an easy task." "Okay, Narcissa, let's not talk about this topic anymore. I am tired today and want to be quiet for a while." Lucius said after saying this. He walked towards his study room. He left happily today, but when he came back he gained nothing. He was in a bad mood now. Lucius also wanted to be close to his son, but only he understood what the glory of the family meant. That is unimaginable power, and it is also a heavy burden that can crush a person's shoulders. Therefore, he never relaxed his encouragement to Draco. At this time, sitting on the chair in the study, Lucius closed his eyes and calmed down his somewhat bad and confused mood. Thinking about all the things that happened today, he always felt like he had overlooked something. What is it? That old man Dumbledore must have some secret, Lucius murmured. He looked at the surrounding arrangements casually, and then his eyes accidentally caught a glimpse of a broomstick placed in the study. Suddenly, as if a bolt of lightning flashed through his mind, Lucius finally found the thing that he had ignored. Yes, that's the little boy who beats Slytherin students on a broomstick. That Gryffindor first-year student has such a great talent for flying at such a young age. He must be a very good student, and he will definitely be loved or paid attention to by his teachers. However, when they were investigating the Acromantula cave in the Forbidden Forest, neither Dumbledore nor Professor McGonagall, nor Snape, who walked in later, behaved very calmly toward the little boy and showed no special reaction. Concerned. Of course, Snape does this to everyone. Lucius added secretly. In fact, thinking about his attitude towards Draco just now, it was actually related to this Gryffindor child. He was subconsciously afraid that Draco would be beaten by such a student. So he let him. My son worked hard and went to read a book quickly. Even Lucius himself had a certain impression of the child's eye-catching performance. So, why were Dumbledore and the others so bland? And their bland attitudes made him not care so much about the child at the time. They didn't even mention the child's name. Lucius flipped through his memory and discovered this. It's so suspicious. Dobby, do you remember the name of the little boy with an oriental face? Lucius asked the house elf who had been following him, expecting to get an answer from him. When Dobby heard this, he instantly showed a painful expression and said with a trembling voice, "Dobby, Dobby, Dobby." Lucius frowned immediately after hearing this. He picked up a thick book on the table, hit Dobby on the head hard and said upset, "Shut up, what's the use of you?" Advertisement. Dobby was hit, but he showed a happy smile, quickly closed his mouth, and said no more. "Forget it, let's arrange for someone to investigate again when we have the chance. There shouldn't be many students with Eastern faces in Hogwarts, so it won't be too difficult to investigate." Lucius sighed and said. Although Dobby did not betray Qin Yu's name, he began to feel worried when he heard his master say these words. He instinctively felt that the master was not very friendly to Qin. It's that misty darkness again that humans can't perceive and understand. 5 groups of fires of different colors lit up again. However, this time the 5 fires were no longer as bright as before, but felt weak. White fire spoke first. "Comrades, we don't have much time. Have you decided on your successor?" "It's decided, Alpha," the other 4 flames replied. "Then, it will become troublesome for us to meet in this way in the future. You must protect yourself and your agents. I hope that you are all safe until the agents grow up enough to destroy the World Destroyer." The white flame said leisurely, "We will, Alpha." "Okay, then wish us good luck." "Wish us good luck." After the sound fell, the 5 fires suddenly went out. Not long after, in a room in a small town in Egypt, a little boy who had been in a coma for 5 days suddenly suffered a fire-like burn on the back of his right hand, and the burn showed a pattern. That pattern is composed of a circle and a lightning bolt. The lightning bolts are in Z-shaped rows and run through the circle. Soon, the little boy opened his eyes faintly. He stood up slowly and rolled his neck. His bright eyes greedily looked at everything around him, and a happy smile appeared on his face. At the same time, in a dark alley in Kathmandu, Nepal, an old beggar who was thought dead by his peers suddenly opened his eyes, and scars of circles and lightning appeared on the back of his right hand. The old beggar looked at the world with compassion, then stood up and slowly walked out of the dark alley. He walked onto the street and walked in the sunshine. Among the bustling crowd, he stopped a young girl and said to her with a compassionate voice, "Child, this world needs you." The young girl's eyes were a little dazed at first, then became firm, and finally nodded to the old beggar and said, "Yes, this world needs me." On the morning of Friday, Qin Yu, who was taking potions class, suddenly felt a chill coming over him, making him shiver. And when he shivered, he almost shook the solution in his hand out of the crucible. You must know that if this solution drips on the body, it will corrode the skin. This will put Qin Yu and Elvis, who are in the same group with him, startled. "It's only the middle of September. Is it already so cold in England?" Qin Yu muttered. Then, he cheered up and continued to prepare the potion. Chapter 32. Qin Yu likes the autumn at Hogwarts very much. The weather has just turned cooler and the autumn air is crisp, which makes people feel very comfortable. As for the shivers just now, I guess it was because I was wearing a little less. Walking out of the potions classroom on the ground floor and onto the ground, he breathed in the cool, fresh air and instantly felt that his sluggish lungs suddenly became clean and refreshing. And the autumn wind seems to carry the fragrance of wood leaves coming from the forbidden forest in the distance. This smell reminds people of the scene of that cute little golden unicorn enjoying itself in nature. Crack! Qin Yu, who was enjoying the beauty of the seasons at Hogwarts, was suddenly tapped on the shoulder with something. This made him very angry. He turned around angrily, and then saw Professor Snape's iceberg face. At this time, Old C was slowly putting away a book in his hand. Obviously, this was the murder weapon that had just attacked Qin Yu. "Don't waste time here. Go have lunch quickly." After Professor Snape said this, he walked away minding his own business, leaving Qin Yu with a silhouette like a lonely figure on the cold river. "I know." Qin Yu rolled his eyes and said, "Snape is not just idle to care about Qin Yu's dietary problems, but he has recently been giving Qin Yu a little help and tutoring his homework himself. Well, it's an after-school story to Avi. Well, holy Professor Snape had better not blaspheme." Qin Yu secretly complained about his wild imagination. After arriving at the auditorium, Qin Yu quickly started eating. After gnawing on a chicken leg, 2 slices of oatmeal bread, and drinking a large bowl of vegetable soup, he wiped his mouth and left, heading to the 8th floor of the main building of Hogwarts. Yes, it was the room of requirement that he was going to. Not long after he arrived in the corridor, Professor Snape, who had long, silky black hair and wore a black robe, slowly walked over. "Professor Snape, I have a question that I really can't help but want to ask you," Qin Yu said with a troubled expression after seeing Snape approaching. Then asked. Professor Snape said calmly, "Did you come a long time ago and then hide, waiting for me to show up?" Qin Yu asked this question that he had wanted to ask for a long time. He very much suspected that Old C hid because he couldn't find the entrance to the room of requirement, but didn't want to wait for him in the corridor because it looked stupid. This kind of behavior cannot be said to be childish. Qin Yu thought to himself. As everyone knows, someone who can ask such a boring question is not much better. Snape's body froze for a moment, then he narrowed his eyes and said faintly, "We will have actual combat training later, and I will test your learning results." "Huh. No, Professor Snape, is your decision a little hasty? I have only been studying with you for 2 days. Qin Yu became anxious now. This is a genius wizard in black magic and potions. He was able to create many awesome spells when he was in school. His talent is absolutely top-notch in the magic world. If you were to spar with him yourself, wouldn't that just mean you were tortured? Who wouldn't feel guilty if I left this matter alone? Practical combat is the best way to learn." Snape walked towards the door that just appeared without looking back. "Let's discuss it again, Professor Snape. I'm still a child. How about waiting for 2 days? Qin Yu quickly caught up and begged. "Stop your poor acting skills and I will be careful." "You won't die," Snape said coldly. Snape was full of ridicule for Qin Yu calling himself a child. If all children were like him, the world would have been in chaos long ago. "Well, I'm afraid of pain. Could you please be gentler later?" Facing the stubborn Snape, Qin Yu could only say with a grimace. "I'll try my best," Snape said lightly, not reassuring at all. Alas, why do I have to ask that question so stupidly? Qin Yu lamented in his heart. According to Dumbledore's plan for Qin Yu, he must focus on 2 aspects of training. One is emotional control, and the other is response to emergencies. Emotional control is easy to understand, because the loss of control of Obscurus comes from the loss of control of its host's emotions, especially the loss of control of the host's negative emotions. As for emergencies, looking at the several times when Qin Yu lost control of his power in Obscurus, it was all because he encountered unexpected situations. If he could handle these emergencies with his own ability, would he still need Obscurus? These two ideas can be said to point to the crux of the problem. Qin Yu admires Lao Deng's insight. In terms of specific implementation, Professor Stephen Swinton will train Qin Yu in emotional control, while Professor Severus Snape will be responsible for responding to emergencies. Since Snape mainly taught Qin Yu the magic spells of defense and attack, which might have certain destructive power and be very noisy, Qin Yu took the initiative to go to the Room of Requirement because the Room of Requirement was spacious enough, concealed enough, and soundproofed well. Imph, can you find the Room of Requirement? Snape snorted disdainfully at that time. Then, Qin Yu actually took him to the door of the Room of Requirement, which left Snape speechless, thinking that this kid was really lucky. Today is the third day that Professor Snape trains Qin Yu in the Room of Requirement. I won't practice anything else today. I'll just use the Expelliarmus spell. Professor Snape said the rules of the battle. When Qin Yu heard this, he breathed a sigh of relief, nodded and said, "Okay, Professor, I understand. It's just Expelliarmus. It's not a spell with too strong attack power. It shouldn't kill anyone." Snape didn't waste any time and walked to the center of the field. Qin Yu quickly walked over with his silver-gray wand. Then, Snape straightened his body and raised his wand in front of him. Qin Yu followed suit and bowed slightly. Then, the two turned around and walked towards the two ends of the field with their backs to each other. They stopped at the edge of the field and turned around again to stand facing each other. After the duel ceremony was completed, Snape looked at Qin Yu with a solemn expression. Looking at this posture, he is trying to be serious. Qin Yu unknowingly paid attention to it and dealt with it seriously. Expelliarmus. Advertisement. The two of them spoke almost at the same time. However, Qin Yu only chanted half of the spell and just waved the wand when he felt the hand holding the wand being hit hard by an invisible force. He came out immediately. With a clang of sound, his silver-gray wand fell to the ground. The timing is good, but the spell is not used proficiently enough, and the hand memory of waving the wand has not been formed. I will give you 30 points for this response, Professor Snape commented, and then said to Qin Yu loudly, "Pick it up and come again." Qin Yu leaned over to pick up the wand as instructed, briefly moved his wrist, and continued to confront Snape. This time, he silently recited the incantation to dispel your weapons several times, and then looked for opportunities to take action after he was almost done practicing it. Expelliarmus. Expelliarmus. This time Qin Yu successfully recited the complete spell and waved the wand, even half a second ahead of Snape. However, he was still shot down by Snape. The spell needs accurate guidance. The more critical the situation is, the more calm you have to deal with it. You just rush to take action but miss the target. Such a spell will only be in vain. 40 points. Snape commented slowly, then he continued, "Pick it up and come again." Qin Yu picked up the wand again and moved erratically around the field. Since accuracy is very important, he made it difficult for Snape to aim. Expelliarmus. Snape directly threw the Expelliarmus curse, knocked off Qin Yu's wand, and mocked, "Stupid, do you think your enemy will give you so much time?" 50 points. You clearly called me stupid, but why did your score get higher? Qin Yu murmured in his mind as he picked up the wand. There was no room for him to be distracted and think too much. When he picked up the wand again, Qin Yu quickly entered the enemy state, ready to cast the spell at any time. In the next half hour, Qin Yu confronted Snape no less than 50 times, but each time he ended up with his wand knocked down. This made him quite frustrated, and he could even feel the unicorn hair in the wand whining in grievance. However, Qin Yu also summed up experience and lessons from repeated failures, constantly improving his offensive strategies, and even almost hit Snape's palm once. However, at the critical moment, Snape actually made a move. He made a very cunning and strange hand movement and successfully avoided the attack. However, as the sparring progressed, Qin Yu was exhausted, and Snape didn't even take a breath, looking calm and relaxed. This made Qin Yu's strategy of consuming the opponent to death unsustainable. On the contrary, he estimated that if he continued, he would fall down from exhaustion. After all, constantly wandering around the court and keeping an eye on the opponent's every move was simply too draining on his physical strength and energy. Moreover, he felt that his hands were all exhausted, almost swollen. Expelliarmus. Expelliarmus. They took action at the same time again, but Qin Yu was still shot down with his wand. When he was hit, He stumbled because he was too tired and hit a table next to him. The wizard's body is an important support. You have to learn how to keep your body in better condition. 59 points. Snape said. Qin Yu took the initiative to pick up the wand without waiting for Snape to speak. This time, while walking around the field, he adjusted his breathing and allowed his body to recover quickly. When he walked half the field and arrived at the original location of Snape, his condition also adjusted. At least the hand holding the wand was much more stable and no longer trembling. At this moment, he noticed that Snape's eyes were looking at a certain location on the ground. How could Qin Yu let go of such a good opportunity? He waved his wand decisively and read loudly, Expelliarmus. Just as Snape read the beginning, a white light flashed and hit his right hand accurately. Clang! His wand fell to the ground. F***K. I finally won. Qin Yu cheered in disbelief. Precise timing, decisive attack, skillful use of spells, full marks. Snape said calmly. Hey, Professor Snape, am I making rapid progress? Do you have a sense of crisis that the teacher will starve to death after teaching the students? Qin Yu said energetically. There's no way, that's Snape. If you shoot down his wand once, you'll be proud of it for the rest of your life. However, compared with Qin Yu's elation, Snape's expression seemed a little lonely. Qin Yu saw his tall body bending down. What surprised Qin Yu was that he didn't immediately pick up the wand that fell to the ground. Instead, he picked up a card lying on the ground and put it. The card was stuffed into a book that also fell to the floor. The book and card were originally placed on a table nearby. Just when Qin Yu was unsteady and bumped, the book fell off the table and a card fell out of it. Of course, Qin Yu had seen this card before. It was the bookmark with the lily sealed in it that Lao Si made in class. Professor Snape, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it just now, Qin Yu said quickly. You did nothing wrong. On the contrary, you were able to take advantage of the enemy's weaknesses and carry out decisive attacks. This is worthy of praise. Snape closed the book and said slowly. What Qin Yu actually wanted to say was, I'm really sorry for knocking off your lily. However, these words were a bit too deep. If he said them out, he might even be personally destroyed by the depressed Lao Si. Qin Yu did not dare to provoke this guy at this time, so he wisely chose to remain silent. I heard that you knocked off Severus's wand? Piske. What a terrible life. Professor Swinton said with great joy during the evening tutorial. Haha, lucky. Professor Snape was distracted by something, so I shot down his wand. Qin Yu didn't dare to really think that he was so awesome. Haha, you are really a humble child, yes? Professor Swinton said with a smile. Regarding Snape's secret, Qin Yu had no intention of telling Professor Swinton, he just kept it vague. After finishing the chat, Professor Swinton began to teach Qin Yu how to control his emotions. And the method he taught was the art of meditation. Follow what I taught you before. Sit cross-legged. Sit quietly and relax. Don't deliberately listen, see, or think. And don't deliberately not listen, see, or think. Let your spirit enter a state between movement and stillness. Don't deliberately move, and don't deliberately try to be still. Professor Swinton didn't know where he learned the art of meditation, and his words were convoluted, but his voice seemed to have a kind of magic power, guiding Qin Yu to gradually sink into his mind and enter the so-called between movement and stillness realm. It's a strange feeling, like you're sleeping but also awake. In this feeling, Qin Yu gradually realized the mystery of the spiritual world. And when he woke up from this meditative state, he found that his spirit seemed to be much stronger, and even the fatigue caused by fighting Snape during the day had disappeared. This made Qin Yu have to look at Professor Swinton with admiration. At the same time, he secretly thought that Hogwarts is indeed a place where dragons and tigers are hidden. Chapter 33. Emotional control lies in being able to calmly respond when encountering an accident. Since you experienced the Acromantula incident, have you found it difficult to calm down when encountering an accident? After the meditation, Professor Swinton talked to Qin Yu in the defense against the dark arts teacher's office. Well, it was talk therapy. Qin Yu thought for a while, nodded and said, that's true. Last time I hit Jerome in the flying class, I hit him a little too hard. Later, I also felt annoyed because others were too noisy, so I hit them in my hands. The levitation spell was cast on all the things. Another time, I almost wanted to pour acid etching solution on Professor Snape's wizard robe. Fortunately, I finally came to my senses. Now I think about it, I'm a little scared. Well, you should be glad that you woke up relatively quickly, Professor Swinton said with deep sympathy. And since practicing the meditative technique with you, I obviously feel that my temper has improved a lot, and I can suppress my anger when I encounter unpleasant things. Just like today when a few Slytherin boys bullied Ravenclaw, one of the girls. I just yelled at them impatiently and didn't do anything. Qin Yu continued. Is there a possibility that they were afraid of you and would give in quickly, so you didn't take action? Professor Swinton almost said this. However, reason told him that he should still provide positive guidance at this time, and it would be better not to expose the child's shortcomings. So Professor Swinton nodded and said, yes, this is a very good phenomenon. The night was already quite late at this time. After the two chatted for a while, Professor Swinton asked Qin Yu to go back and rest. What time is the training tomorrow? Qin Yu asked before leaving. Let me think about it. 10 o'clock in the morning. I still want to sleep a little longer. You should come here to see me then. I will change you to a more interesting training program. I will definitely not let you be so dry. Sit down, Professor Swinton said to Qin Yu, and finally gave up a little. Okay, Professor Swinton, good night. Qin Yu waved goodbye to Professor Swinton. Professor Swinton was sitting in his office, staring at the night outside the window in a daze. Well, it was indeed a daze, not a meditation. Qin Yu left the main building of Hogwarts and walked towards Gryffindor Tower. He soon arrived at the 8th floor. After giving the entrance command to the fat madam, the entrance opened. He got into the door and entered the grid Landfinder's seating area. Then, he washed as usual, put on his pajamas, and climbed into his bed. However, after lying on the bed, Qin Yu did not go to sleep immediately. Instead, he continued to review the meditation technique taught to him by Professor Swinton, because Professor Swinton once told him that he could practice it as long as he had time. Controlling mental power is beneficial, and a wizard's mental strength is also part of his strength. Qin Yu didn't feel sleepy at this time, so he might as well take the time to practice. He closed his eyes and began to meditate according to the method taught by Professor Swinton. The room was not very quiet. On the contrary, Jimmy and Wilson were chatting there, complaining about not being able to play in Hogsmeade on Saturday like upperclassmen. Burke was playing with an object that made music, and Elvis was reading a book, making the sound of turning pages from time to time. These voices, coupled with the face of a certain girl that appeared in his mind from time to time, or some chaotic thoughts that had no beginning and no end, made it difficult for Qin Yu to calm down for a while. Don't deliberately listen, see, and think, and don't deliberately not listen, see, and think. Don't deliberately move, and don't deliberately be still. Professor Swinton's words seemed to flash through Qin Yu's mind, leading him into that mysterious state. Unknowingly, the voices of the roommates became a little distant, or in other words, they became some kind of background sound that did not cause any disturbance in Qin Yu's heart. Those messy thoughts also calmed down and passed through his mind without leaving a trace. And he also gradually entered meditation, and his spirit was recuperated and strengthened unconsciously. The next day, early in the morning, we visited Hagrid's hut. Wow, what a beautiful little girl. She seems to have grown taller compared to the last time I saw her, Hagrid praised as she held a photo in her giant hands. Advertisement, show me, show me. +1 brothers George and Fred stood on tiptoe, eager to grab the photo. Qin Yu pulled the two guys apart and took the photo from Hagrid's hand. What are you doing so stingy? I didn't even see it clearly just now. George protested. Yes, we have to remember what she looks like, so that we can help her when she comes to Hogwarts. Fred followed. I will take good care of her without your help, Qin Yu said to the two boys angrily. Then, he turned to Hagrid and continued. She specifically asked me to convey her gratitude to you in her letter. She said that the book you sent was wonderful and helped her a lot. Haha, what a polite little girl. You're welcome to tell her. It's my honor that she likes her, Hagrid said with a smile. Yes, that photo was Hermione's. In the photo, Hermione straightened her body and stood in front of Granger's house with a smile on her face, holding Trig, the owl with blank eyes, in her arms. This is the photo included in the letter Qin Yu received this morning. Just as he said, Hermione specifically expressed her gratitude to Hagrid for the gift of the book in the letter. The out-of-print collection of books written by Newt Scamander was deeply loved by the little girl. She learned a lot from reading it and cherished it. You can have a bowtruckle, or a sniffer, or an invisible beast. In the disappointed eyes of George and Fred, Qin Yu put the photo into the envelope and put it away properly. Okay, let's get down to business. Qin Yu came to Hagrid's cabin early in the morning not just to convey the words in Hermione's letter, but also for another purpose, which was to discuss business matters with Hagrid and the Weasley brothers. Well, let's call it a business matter. We heard from Hagrid that you plan to sell things under the guise of a school? Fred said first. Fred, please pay attention to your wording. What do you mean using the guise of the school? We are seriously approved by the school. Qin Yu rolled his eyes and said, yes, we will also hand over part of the profits to the school. This is a reasonable thing. Fred said quickly and seriously. Yes, we are using the name of the school reasonably. George also said. So, let's talk about pricing. Qin Yu said the important issue of today's discussion. As a result, Qin Yu and the Weasley brothers began to discuss the price of the venom they would sell next, under Hagrid's gaze. In the end, they increased the original price by about 20%, that is, 1 pint of S grade is 250 gold galleons, and 1 pint of A, B, and C grade is 180, 150, and 120 gold galleons respectively. With the golden name of Hogwarts and the reputation of Professor Snape, the price is a huge discount. As for Hagrid's serious suggestion that the number 250 is unlucky in the East, Qin Yu shrugged and said he didn't care. This confused Hagrid for a long time. He couldn't understand why Qin didn't care about this number anymore. The next step is to put the Hogwarts icon on the bottles and mark each bottle of venom with grade personally evaluated by Professor Snape. Qin Yu finally added. George and Fred nodded in unison, expressing their admiration for Qin Yu's shameless behavior. No, they admired his business marketing ability. Chapter 34. Qin, I heard from Charlie that you might make the Gryffindor Quidditch team? George asked enviously. Charlie was full of praise for your flying ability and said that the two of us are far behind you, Fred said in frustration. At this time, they came out of Hagrid's hut and were walking towards Hogwarts Castle. The Weasley twins have always felt that they are outstanding among their peers. However, after meeting Qin Yu, a boy who is 1 year younger than them, they feel that they are inferior in terms of IQ, EQ, and magical talent. They were crushed. Of course, the most important thing was that their proud business acumen looked very immature in front of Qin Yu. Now, when they heard that Qin Yu was going to join their dream Quidditch team, how could they not feel envious and frustrated? However, they had long been convinced by Qin Yu. Otherwise, they wouldn't have become normal now that they saw Kelly and Anna's mother and daughter being so affectionate with Qin Yu. Charlie did tell me about this, but Professor McGonagall feels that we should not be too hasty. She wants me to participate in this Quidditch team selection. If I pass, I will be allowed to join. Qin Yu said the two brothers. Are you also participating in the team selection? George said in surprise. Isn't this going to bump into us? Fred suddenly felt unsure. Just go all out. I believe you can do it. Qin Yu encouraged. Okay, although I know there is a gap with you, we can't run away. George encouraged himself. Well, there are quite a lot of places this time, so we don't have no chance. Fred also regained some confidence. Come on then, wish us good luck. Qin Yu said to the two of them. Well, come on, the two brothers said in unison. The three of them talked and quickly walked into the gate of Hogwarts. Qin Yu said goodbye to George and Fred. Seeing that the time was almost 10 o'clock, he went directly to the main building to find Professor Swinton. When Qin Yu knocked on the door of Professor Swinton's office and walked in, he saw a black cabinet placed on the open space of the office. The moment he saw the cabinet, Qin Yu had a rough guess. Sure enough, Professor Swinton said with a smile, today's training program is to face your fears. I originally planned to show you some scary images, but you are different from other children. You don't seem to be afraid of those things, so this is what I found, Boggett. Swinton said this and pointed to the black cabinet. Boggett? Qin Yu said, pretending to be confused. Yes, this is a magical creature that can transform. It can see through your inner fears and turn into the thing you fear the most. The way to deal with Boggetts is very simple, that is, use the Boggett expulsion spell. Funny ridiculous. Make it the funniest thing you can, so that the scary thing becomes ridiculous, explains Professor Swinton. In fact, Qin Yu knew something about this matter, but he had never cast the funny spell before, and he didn't know what his biggest fear was. This still made him feel a little uneasy. Seeing his reaction, Professor Swinton finally felt a sense of accomplishment. That's right, this kid has scared himself. Professor Swinton thought to himself. Okay, now I'll teach you how to cast the funny curse. After saying this, Professor Swinton explained to Qin Yu in detail the pronunciation of the spell, the waving of the wand, and the timing. It has to be said that Qin Yu is quite talented in magic. I don't know if he is like this originally, or because of the blessing of Obscurus. In short, he learned this spell very quickly, and it only took him less than 5 minutes. You can cast this magic spell skillfully. This made Professor Swinton sigh again. Qin Yu is really a worry-free thing. The next step is to face the Boggett. Remember, the more afraid you are, the more powerful it will be. You have to calm down and not let fear control your emotions. You have to work hard to find how to make it funny. Swinton the professor walked to the cabinet and reminded solemnly. Okay, I understand, Professor Swinton. Qin Yu nodded. In fact, he was also a little curious about what he was most afraid of. Then, let's get started. Advertisement. After Professor Swinton said this, he waved his wand and opened the cabinet door. As the cabinet door opened, an indescribable strange feeling arose in Qin Yu's heart, making him very uncomfortable. Then, a black shadow jumped out of the cabinet. After a while, the black shadow twisted in the air, turned into something, and landed on the ground. When Qin Yu saw such a thing, he was instantly stunned. It was an extremely familiar desk, with a keyboard, mouse and monitor placed on it, as well as familiar mugs and cactus, and an unfinished PPT file was open on that monitor. The first PPT has the words, Weekly Summary Report, written on it. Qin Yu looked at everything familiar and seemed to be pulled toward that workstation by an invisible force, and he seemed to hear the bosses urging in his ears. Could it be that everything is fake? I am still the same social creature as before. There is no magical world and no Hermione. Thinking of this, Qin Yu seemed to have something stuck in his heart, which made him feel irritable, and even his breathing became a little heavy. Qin, Professor Swinton's voice suddenly sounded. Qin Yu was suddenly startled, and subconsciously used the meditation technique. His mind quickly calmed down, and then he waved his magic wand and recited the incantation. Ridiculous! As he finished reciting the incantation, he pointed the wand at the desk, which instantly distorted, and with a bang, those things reorganized to form the shape of a large pug, and the monitor was the pug's head. Looking at the pug, consisting of a table and a monitor with its tail wagging, Qin Yu exhaled and smiled. Well, that's a good idea, Professor Swinton praised. Then, the boggart disappeared and the cabinet door closed again. You performed very well this time. You were able to adjust your mentality in time and respond quickly, which proves that you have a certain ability to control your emotions. Professor Swinton concluded. Thank you, Professor Swinton. If you hadn't reminded me just now, it might have been difficult for me to get out of my fear for a while. Qin Yu said sincerely. You don't need to belittle yourself. Many people will be absent-minded for a certain period of time when they face their fear for the first time. Your behavior is really normal, and I believe that you can calm down quickly even if I don't warn you. The boggart trial was relatively successful. At least it made Qin Yu feel fear, and he did not lose control of his emotions when facing his fear, thus summoning the power of Obscurus. This is a good phenomenon. Achieve the purpose of Professor Swinton's training today. After Qin Yu's emotions completely calmed down, Professor Swinton arranged for him to undergo several more trials. Later, Qin Yu would not hesitate and directly transformed boggarts into various funny things. Okay, you can go back. Goodbye, Professor Swinton. Goodbye, Qin. After the morning trial was completed, Professor Swinton asked Qin Yu to go back. After Qin Yu left, Swinton stood in the quiet office, thinking about what Qin Yu was afraid of. The emotions in his eyes changed, and finally he murmured inexplicably, "What a special child." Then, he waved his wand and opened the cabinet containing the boggart. The boggart changed rapidly and fell to the ground and turned into a statue. The statue is of a tall man wearing a robe, holding a buckler in his left hand and a long sword in his right hand. The man stood with his head held high and his eyes determined. Looking at this statue, Swinton frowned. Ridiculous. With the wave of the magic wand, the statue's face was immediately painted with oil paint and turned into a red-nosed clown. Soon, the funny clown disappeared and returned to the cabinet. Chapter 35. After you have seen the fantasy and beauty of the world, will you still be willing to repeat your life unchanged? Qin Yu had never thought about this issue before, until Boggart told him that it turned out that he had such a deep obsession with his past life. It turned out that the innocence, dreams, and longings of his youth that he had hidden in his heart had not disappeared. Perhaps it was because he relived his life and became a boy again that those innocence, dreams, and longings became vivid again. Or maybe it was precisely because of those innocence, dreams, and longings that he was able to be a young man again. This question is unclear. Just like he has no way of knowing why the god of destiny guided him here, showed him a new world, and made him become the boy here. Then, you might as well follow your heart and experience all kinds of joys and sorrows in this world. In the end, you must live a different life, live up to this experience, and live up to the current flow. Qin Yu successfully completed Professor Swinton's boggart training. At the same time, This training also brought Qin Yu a lot of confusion and thinking. However, along the way from Professor Swinton's office to the Great Hall of Hogwarts, Qin Yu has figured out some things. Although there are still some things that he has not figured out, he feels that his mood is clearer and more determined than before. This kind of gain even far exceeds the sense of accomplishment brought by using the Expelliarmus curse to shoot down Professor Snape's wand. Of course, this does not mean that Professor Snape is not as good as Professor Swinton. On the contrary, in Qin Yu's view, Severus Snape is really a very talented and imaginative wizard. His words can always point out Qin Yu's shortcomings to the point and make targeted corrections based on Qin Yu's own characteristics. Guidance. This is also one of the important reasons why Qin Yu's magic attainments have developed rapidly. As for Professor Swinton, in Qin Yu's opinion, he is a very knowledgeable person. He can master all kinds of things at his fingertips, including ancient and modern times, both inside and outside, all over the world, wizards and muggles. He is especially familiar with some historical sites and legends, which Qin knows very well. You even couldn't help but suggest that he teach history of magic class, and he would definitely be more popular than Professor Binns. Snape and Swinton, one of them is a cold genius wizard, and the other is an enthusiastic and knowledgeable person. Qin Yu sometimes thinks that if these two are put together, they can have a drink. As everyone knows, GGAD formed by Grindelwald and Dumbledore is a pair of very famous CPs in the wizarding world. By analogy, Snape and Swinton can completely form SSSS, or simply called S4. After imagining Snape and Professor Swinton in the same frame, Qin Yu felt that they were quite harmonious. In addition to these two teachers, the younger generation of Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Draco Malfoy can also be combined in pairs to form Roa, Deha, and Dro. It has to be said that if the three boys become friends, they can even form HWBOYS to debut. Note: HW is the abbreviation of Hogwarts, and the abbreviation of the school's full name is HSWW. Qin Yu, George, and Fred once thought about the future of the cultural industry in the magical world, and if they were brought together, there would be great development prospects. Thinking about these, Qin Yu unconsciously smiled. After all, the scene of Harry, Ron, and Draco standing together was quite visually impactful. At this time, he was already sitting at the dining table in the auditorium. Jimmy and others next to him saw his expression and cast curious glances. "Qin, what are you happy about?" Elvis asked first. Elvis always felt that Qin was his best friend in school, so he was very concerned about Qin's affairs. I know. It must be the letter in the morning. I came earlier at that time and saw that Qin had received another pink letter." Jimmy suddenly thought of this and said excitedly, "Huh, Qin received a letter again?" Wilson said enviously. Elvis and Burke had almost the same expression as Wilson. Advertisement. Qin Yu couldn't argue with these little brats. After all, they couldn't understand the fact that he secretly took CP, and it was all in vain. As for the letter, haven't these little brats become numb after receiving it so many times? Okay, stop talking about me. What are your plans for the next 2 days? Qin Yu changed the topic at the right time. As expected, Jimmy and the others stopped worrying about this matter, and their attention was diverted. They excitedly told him that they were going to watch the Quidditch selection activities of each college tomorrow. After learning that Qin Yu signed up for this selection, several friends became even more excited. Jimmy proposed that they form a cheerleading team to cheer for Qin Yu, and Elvis also volunteered to make banners. Listening to their chatter and feeling the enthusiasm of these little brats, Qin Yu felt inexplicably warm in his heart. After lunch, Jimmy and the others got busy making preparations to cheer for Qin Yu. Qin Yu continued to receive Professor Snape's careful teaching. Facts have proved that the last time Qin Yu was able to shoot down Snape's wand with the Expelliarmus curse was purely because of Lao Si's indifference. At the beginning of this afternoon's training, although only the Expelliarmus curse was still allowed to be used to attack, Qin Yu clearly felt that Snape was starting to get serious. Not to mention the doubling of magic power, Snape's move directly numbed Qin Yu's hand. This was what he expected. After all, Snape was very powerful. But why can there be 2 consecutive spells firing this kind of operation? No one has ever told me that this can be done, okay? This directly confused Qin Yu. This wasn't the end yet. Just after Qin Yu got used to Lao Si's 2 consecutive blows, he struck again with 3 consecutive blows. Moreover, in addition to continuously releasing magic spells, Qin Yu was very suspicious that when Snape cast the Expelliarmus spell, he also added some effects such as shock, stun, knockback, flash, paralysis, burning, freezing, etc. Qin Yu was beaten to the point where he was left in a state of embarrassment and miserable. Strictly speaking, Professor Snape did only use the Expelliarmus spell, but it was modified by himself. When the training was over, Qin Yu felt that his body was about to fall apart. Isn't this really a deliberate revenge on me for what happened yesterday? Looking at Snape's calm face, Qin Yu couldn't help complaining in his heart. Fortunately, Laozi threw a few healing spells at the end, which reduced his fatigue and pain a lot. Since the Quidditch selection was a very important matter, Qin Yu was allowed to take a day off to participate in the selection. The next day, he came to the Quidditch pitch surrounded by his friends. Here, quite a few acquaintances came to participate in the selection. In addition to George and Fred, there was also a Gryffindor girl, Angelina Johnson. In addition, a handsome guy from Hufflepuff also came to participate. He is Cedric Diggory. Looking at the handsome boy from a distance, Qin Yu had to admit that this boy was indeed indistinguishable from him in appearance. Author, H2A. Dividing line. Note, GGAD is the abbreviation of Gellert Grindelwald and Albus Dumbledore. Chapter 36. Quidditch originated in the 11th century and has a history of nearly 1,000 years. It is one of the most influential sports in the wizarding world. Many teachers and students in Hogwarts are very keen on this sport, and Professor McGonagall is an experienced Quidditch fan. She once ignored Professor Snape for 3 weeks because Gryffindor's Quidditch team lost to Slytherin, and then she was happy for several days because of a win. Moreover, she is also very good at discovering Quidditch talents, and she has worked very hard for the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Of course, under her care, the Gryffindor Quidditch team became one of the strongest in the entire school. Of course, Professor McGonagall will not be absent from such an important selection event today. As soon as Qin Yu arrived at the stadium, he saw Professor McGonagall sitting in the teacher's exclusive stand, looking at the stadium with a serious expression. So nervous. With so many people watching, wouldn't it be embarrassing if it falls down later? George and Fred said nervously next to Qin Yu. While they were talking, they couldn't help but look at the Gryffindor girls waiting not far away for selection. Qin Yu knew that the two brothers were probably looking at the pretty Angelina Johnson. This girl is here to be chosen as the chaser. Seeing the looks from Qin Yu and the Weasley brothers, Angelina nodded to them. Wow, is she saying hello to me? Fred said excitedly. Maybe with me. George followed. You are overthinking. You must be following me. Qin Yu deliberately teased these two silly boys. Hey, how is that possible? She doesn't know you. Fred said disdainfully. Yes, the little girl next to her is the one who greets you. George said. Qin Yu looked over and saw that there was indeed a familiar little girl next to Angelina. She seemed to be a Gryffindor student in his class, named Katie Bell. Qin Yu also waved to her as a greeting. The three chatted for a while, and the tense atmosphere became much better. Moreover, these two boys, George and Fred, have out-of-touch personalities, so they are not the kind of people who are afraid of getting into trouble. If you were really timid, you wouldn't be the first hegemon of Hogwarts. No, you should be the second hegemon. Quidditch players are divided into 4 types: goalkeeper, chaser, batter, and seeker, and selection is naturally conducted in 4 different ways. Although the selection method is different every year, the testing abilities are similar. For example, a goalkeeper should be tested on his or her ability to guard the goal in the air. The chaser tests his or her ability to chase the quaffle, shoot the ball, and dodge bludgers in the air. As for the batsman, Qin Yu wants to be selected, he must complete a certain difficult batting action in the air and hit a certain target to be considered qualified. The seeker focuses on the flight speed, because the golden snitch is too fast. If the player cannot keep up with the speed, he will not be able to catch it. Advertisement Hufflepuff's Marshal, Cedric Diggory, was chosen to be the seeker. Cedric is indeed a top-level boy in school, sunny, handsome, and smart. In short, he fits the image of a perfect wizard in every aspect. When he appeared in the sky riding a broomstick, the little girls in Hufflepuff all cheered enthusiastically, and some even shouted, "Cedric, I love you." Even students from other colleges, many cheer him on. He's very popular. The person who presided over the Hufflepuff seeker selection was a senior Quidditch player from the same college. He took out the golden snitch from the box, briefly explained to several candidates, and then threw it into the air, and the golden snitch he immediately opened his wings and flapped them rapidly, and then, while everyone was slightly dazed, he flew away without a trace. Whoa, it's really fast. Oh, I probably don't have the talent to be a seeker. After seeing it, George and Fred sighed respectively. While they were talking, Cedric and others held down the handles of their broomsticks, lowered their bodies, speeded up instantly, and chased after them. Whoosh! Seeing Cedric taking the lead, warm applause instantly erupted from the stands. It's really awesome, Qin Yu said sincerely. It must be admitted that Cedric is really outstanding in terms of flight speed, and is not comparable to those who are running at the same time. Sure enough, a few minutes after flying out, Cedric successfully found the special golden snitch used for selection. He happily waved the golden ball around. The girls in the stands were even more excited, with loud applause and cheers. "Hey, don't you just look better and be faster?" Fred said. "It's just a selection. When the actual competition comes, he may not be able to beat Charlie. George thinks his brother Charlie is the best. It's a pity that Charlie will graduate next year." Qin Yu curled his lips and said, "Yes, our team is still short of a seeker, and I don't think there will be anyone selected this year," Fred said with some worry after hearing this. "Then what should we do? If I had known, I should have found a way to prevent this Cedric from passing the selection," George said in frustration. Yes, I have 7 or 8 spells that can interfere with him catching the golden snitch. Unfortunately, it's too late to say anything now. He has already passed," Fred also said unwillingly. "Okay, can't you two think of a normal way?" Qin Yu rolled his eyes and said angrily, and then he said meaningfully, "Besides, maybe next year's first-year students there is someone who can replace Charlie. First grade? Pull him down. When I think of Ron, I'm worried about the next first grade." George thought about his brother's coward and couldn't help complaining. "Although I agree with what you said, it's not very good for you to say this about Ron," Fred said seriously. "These are all brothers." Qin Yu couldn't help but feel sympathy for little Ron in his heart. The seeker selection ended quickly, because there were not many qualified ones, and Hufflepuff Cedric performed the most eye-catchingly. The selections from other houses were lackluster. Gryffindor only recruited one who was barely qualified and served as a substitute. However, Qin Yu felt that if he really wanted to fly seriously, he could fly faster than him. After the selection of seekers, there is the selection of goalkeepers and chasers. When Angelina Johnson came on the stage, Fred and George were shouting so hard that they might have made a lot of noise if they weren't allowed to use the loud voice charm. It has to be said that Angelina is not only good-looking, but also has superb flying skills. She completed many difficult actions while riding a broomstick and successfully caught the quaffle and threw it into the goal. Then, without any surprise, she was selected. When the chaser selection was over, it was the batter's turn. Qin Yu was holding the broomstick in his hand, somewhat nervous. Chapter 37. Wow, it's Qin, that Qin from Gryffindor. He's also here to participate in the selection. In the Ravenclaw stands, a thin girl with light blonde hair said excitedly to her companions. At this time, several Gryffindor candidates were already flying slowly over the court on broomsticks. It's really him. Very few first-year freshmen participate in the selection. He is so awesome, his companion also said with bright eyes. When we were in class together, I thought he was special. Not only did he study well, but he was also able to chat calmly with the teachers. Moreover, he also loved to laugh. The blonde girl murmured. Yes, he looks really good-looking when he smiles, with 2 shallow dimples, his companion said with deep sympathy. Then should we cheer him up? Well, he is not from our college after all. Isn't that bad? Just as the two of them were whispering, a voice came from not far away from them. Qin, come on. The two of them turned around and saw that it was a little girl from the same school as them. Both girls raised their eyebrows, no longer hesitated, turned around, put their hands to their mouths and shouted loudly, Qin, come on. Qin, you are the best. The voice was immediately an octave higher than that of the girl who was ahead of them. Qin Yu had just flown into the air and was somewhat surprised when he heard cheering sounds from the stands around him. Although he had previously muttered in his heart that Cedric was nothing more than this and that he should not bully young people into poverty, he had to admit that he could not compare to this boy's popularity. After all, Cedric had been enrolled in school for more than a year and was active in the school. In various activities, he is considered a minor celebrity, but he has just entered school for less than a month, and not many people know him. However, he was surprised to find that there seemed to be quite a few people shouting his name to cheer him up. Gryffindor students certainly accounted for the majority here, and there were also considerable numbers from other houses. Looking around the stands, Qin Yu saw people waving and shouting at him in the Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and even Slytherin seating areas. Well, most of them are younger first-year students, and Qin Yu can recognize many familiar faces. It seems that I am still somewhat popular. Qin Yu couldn't help but feel a little proud, then showed a reserved smile and waved to the people in the stands. In fact, what Qin Yu didn't know was that he was already a special being among the first-year students. A way of doing things that far exceeds his age, a strong learning ability, Recently, he has been actively answering questions and working hard to earn points, a spring-like attitude towards his classmates, except Jerome, and a leadership talent that is difficult to conceal. Referring to Jimmy, Wes hangs around him all day long, and he is loved by professors. He can talk to any teacher. These advantages make him the envy, admiration, and even jealousy of the first-year students. In fact, many girls have secretly gathered together to share all the information about him, and Elvis has become an important source for them to gather information from time to time. That's right, they knew exactly what day Qin Yu's birthday was, what color he liked, what food he liked to eat, what books he liked to read, and even how many pairs of socks he had. If Qin Yu knew this, he would definitely beat Elvis up and throw him into the Black Lake to feed the fish. Of course, when he knew this, it was already a long time later, and by then Elvis had already changed his mind and stopped doing this, and deeply reflected on his mistakes. Back to batsman selection. Qin Yu felt full of energy after receiving cheers from his classmates, especially Elvis and Jimmy, who even pulled out a decent banner. But because the distance was too far and the banner was too small, he didn't see clearly what was written on it. No matter what, he became much calmer. Then, looking at the large owl models floating in the sky, he really wanted to complain about the imagination of the designer, Professor Swinton. By the way, Professor Swinton personally designed the rules for the selection of batsmen this time. First, he arranged 10 large owl models in black and white in the sky, and used these owls floating in the air and making irregular movements to act as imaginary players. Then, the host of this selection throws a certain number of bludgers into the air, with the goal of attacking the white owls. Then, the participating students have to use the bats in their hands to hit the bludgers away, in order to protect the white owls from being hit by the bludgers, and to shoot down the black owls as much as possible. In the end, the game will be judged based on the number of times it protects the white owl and shoots down the black owl. There is actually nothing wrong with these rules. They're normal. However, looking at those silly and cute fat bird models with round faces, Qin Yu only felt that the style of painting was a bit too inconsistent. Of course, this is very Swinton. Time did not slow down at all because of Qin Yu's complaints. Soon the whistle blew, and the selection officially began. This time it was 5 Gryffindor students including Qin Yu, George, and Fred. The 5 people were scattered and suspended in the air, keeping a distance of 30 or 40 meters from each other. Shortly after the whistle ended, several regular members of the Quidditch team, led by Charlie, Wood, and others, began to release the bludgers. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. One after another, the sound of breaking through the air sounded in the air, and the 5 bludgers shot towards the floating white owls like solid cannonballs. Watching the bludgers coming, a senior candidate from Gryffindor held up his bat and flew towards the bludger closest to him. Then, when approaching the bludger, he yelled and swung the bat and hit it. However, he didn't know whether it was because the range of movement of swinging the bat was too large, or the broomstick under his crotch was difficult to control. In short, he was unsteady and fell forward. The bat in his hand swung directly away, and the flying shot the incoming bludger hit his arm with a bang. The man screamed and fell from the sky together with the out-of-control broomstick. Fortunately, the teacher cast a delaying spell when he landed, and he was not injured further when he landed on the ground. However, the impact of the bludger just now clearly injured his arm badly, and he lay on the ground wailing in pain. At this time, several senior students who were waiting on the sidelines and acted as first aiders ran there very calmly. When they arrived, they skillfully cast a pain-relieving spell on his arm, and then worked together to lift him onto a stretcher. Lift it away quickly so as not to interfere with the selection of others on the court. The whole process was smooth, which showed that they had done similar first aid work more than once. Well, in Quidditch, it's normal to break an arm or a leg, let alone a minor injury like a dislocation. The injured buddy was eliminated directly, and at the same time, he reminded the remaining 4 people on the field. Dealing with bludgers is not that simple. George and Fred looked at each other and immediately gave up on confronting each other. Instead, they planned to let the bludger fly for a while so that they could find the right opportunity to come back. The candidate whom Qin Yu didn't recognize immediately flew to the side of the white owl he was guarding, as if he was waiting for something to happen. Qin Yu looked at the bludger flying towards him and smiled. He moved his neck and shoulder joints, then leaned down and pressed the wooden handle of the broomstick. Then, he activated his broomstick and suddenly flew out. What is Qin doing? Why is he flying in another direction? There is no bludger there? The little girl with light blonde hair shouted in confusion. Yes, he wouldn't be afraid of being hit by the bludger, so he would fly to the side. His companion muttered in a low voice. Advertisement, how is that possible? Qin is not such a person. How could he be afraid? The little girl with light blonde hair said immediately with dissatisfaction. I didn't say he was afraid. It's possible that he wanted to avoid it temporarily. His companion quickly explained. Maybe. I don't know. The two continued to stare into the sky with confusion. There were many people who had the same doubts as them, because Qin Yu did fly to the side. However, not everyone is ignorant. Senior Quidditch fans like Professor McGonagall saw Qin Yu's actions, and her eyes that had always been indifferent already shone brightly. Professor Swinton, who was also in the teacher's stand, showed an expression of surprise and surprise. Grandstanding. Professor Snape couldn't help but muttered, but a hint of admiration flashed in his eyes. Those who understand naturally understand, and those who don't understand don't have to wonder for too long, because Qin Yu flies so fast that he quickly tells others his purpose. I saw that after he flew out, he did not fly to the side along a straight path, but always pulled the wooden handle of the broomstick to fly in a rapid arc. It's probably akin to driving around a roundabout in the Muggle world. When he quickly circled a semicircle and turned back, he happened to be close to the bludger he was defending. So, he speeded up to catch up, kept moving in the same direction as the bludger, and quickly closed the distance. At this time, the bludger was less than 10 meters away from the white owl he was guarding, and was about to collide with the cute fat bird model swinging slowly in the air. At the critical moment, Qin Yu held the broomstick with one hand to control the flight direction and speed, raised the bat with the other hand, and hit the bludgers flying in the same direction. Bang! A crash sounded in the air. Qin Yu's bat hit the bludger accurately and knocked it away suddenly. The cute white owl avoided the fate of being shot down and continued to float and sway in the air, swaying from side to side, as if it was congratulating itself on escaping. Whoosh! There was warm applause from the stands. It's an arc flying around and hitting the ball in the same direction. This boy is so amazing. He can actually complete such a difficult move. Someone with knowledge shouted out the name of this classic move. Yes, it is indeed an arc flying around and hitting the ball in the same direction. Just now I also suspected that he was going to do this action, but I subconsciously felt that this was impossible, because this is an action that can only be completed by professional players. How could he do it? But he really did it. Someone next to him continued. Is this difficult? Another person asked with some confusion. Is it difficult? Can you please remove the word ? The biggest requirement of this movement is the ability to control the flight. If your speed and control skills are not up to standard, you will not be able to catch up with the bludger. The person who spoke first said. The guy who doesn't understand football explained excitedly. He can do this action at such a young age, so he has a promising future. Yes, I will definitely pay attention to him in the future. By the way, what is the name of this little boy? Why haven't I heard of him before? What grade is he in? He seems to be a first-year freshman. I heard the first-year kids next to him calling him Qin or King. It was too noisy and I couldn't hear him clearly. It doesn't matter. I'm a fan of him anyway. Ugh, you're great. People who understand how powerful Qin Yu's moves are excited and explain to those around them who don't understand how cool and difficult this move is. As for the first-year students who had been cheering for Qin Yu, they shouted even harder. As for Qin Yu, he actually doesn't know anything about the so-called arc-shaped ball flying in the same direction. He just understands the concept of speed is relative. This is also thanks to the buddy who was hit by the bludger. If he hadn't seen him being hit so badly by the bludger, Qin Yu would probably have attacked him head-on. However, after seeing the miserable state of this man, Qin Yu quickly adjusted his strategy. Since he could not change the actual speed of the bludger, he could fly in the same direction as the bludger. In this case, the relative speed of the bludger and him would be it will become very small, or even in a relatively static state, and then it won't be so laborious to hit the ball. It was with this in mind that Qin Yu performed a series of actions, including flying back and forth and then flying in the same direction as the bludger before hitting the ball. Facts have proved that his idea was correct. He successfully knocked away the fast-flying bludger, which gave Qin Yu a slight sense of confidence and accomplishment. Little did he know, he accidentally completed a difficult Quidditch maneuver in front of everyone, shocking those who were watching. During the next selection period, Qin Yu continued to use his super flight control ability and flight speed to knock the bludger away from all directions. In addition to flying around in an arc, he also tried different methods and unintentionally used many classic tactical moves. This turned the selection of batsmen directly into his own show. Of course, he has never experienced professional training after all, and some of his movements are just random and he doesn't do them well, or he only does half of them and changes his appearance. However, this does not prevent many people from treating him as a genius. rising Quidditch star. Family members like Professor McGonagall and Charlie Weasley were of course happy. Professor Snape, on the other hand, secretly smacked his lips, feeling that the future Gryffindor Quidditch team was a bit tricky, and resisted the temptation to cast any interference spells to bring down the grandstanding boy from the sky. Since the entire stadium's attention was focused on Qin Yu, the unnamed contestant who was hit by the bludger and landed on the ground did not attract much attention, except, of course, the conscientious and extremely skilled rescue team. As for the brothers George and Fred, they got together at some point and worked together to deal with those difficult bludgers, and in the end each scored a lot of points. Of course, it is not a foul for the two brothers to do this, because there is no rule in advance that they cannot join forces. After the selection was completed, Qin Yu naturally became the batsman of the Quidditch team, while brothers George and Fred became the substitute batters. Although they were substitutes, the two brothers were still very happy because compared to Qin, they were really convinced. Then, they came down from the world to find Angelina, who was also selected for the Quidditch team. Johnson, tell her that we will be teammates from now on and take care of each other, and so on. The Slytherin candidates who came on stage after Qin Yu performed very mediocrely. One boy wanted to imitate Qin Yu's arcing flying movement and threw himself away, which in vain increased the work of the rescue team. Quantity. Qin Yu handed the borrowed broomstick to Charlie, and then went to the stage to meet his roommates. Seeing how hard they worked to cheer him on, Qin Yu decided to treat them to various candies from Duke B. Of course, this required Hagrid went to Hogsmeade Village to buy something, and they, the younger students, were not allowed to go out. When he reached the stands where the Gryffindor students were, Qin Yu was greeted by everyone's enthusiastic cheers. Qin, you are great. Qin, your moves are amazing. Qin, can you teach me how to use a broomstick? I'm not very skilled yet. Under the crowd's attention, Qin Yu smiled and greeted them as he walked by, feeling the feeling of being a public figure. Then, he came to where Elvis and the others were. When Elvis and Jimmy saw Qin Yu coming, they quickly pulled the small banner probably made of Elvis's scarf and shouted at Qin Yu. Qin, you are so awesome. Qin Yu finally saw the words on the banner clearly. Qin is the king. The autumn wind blew the banner made of scarf, fluttering like a flag. At this time, neither the boy holding the banner nor the people looking at the line of words knew how such a sentence would spread in the magical world in the future. And they, at this moment, are simply enjoying simple joy. Joy should be simple. Chapter 38. This Quidditch selection lasted almost a whole day, and it was considered a lively whole school activity. Young people are very enthusiastic about these things, shouting and cheering outside the field like a joy, releasing the youthful energy unique to their age, as if they are tireless. By about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the selection was coming to an end. Everyone left one after another, leaving only a few senior students and teachers to clean up the place. Qin Yu saw Professor Swinton coming to the bottom of the stadium from a distance and gently waving his wand towards the sky. Then, the black and white owl models suspended in the air flew down one by one, and when they were close to the ground, shrunk suddenly, and quickly flew into a cloth bag held by Professor Swinton. Then, he pulled the rope at the mouth of the bag, tied the bag, and walked away with it. Looking at the cloth bag that was only the size of a potions textbook, Qin Yu couldn't help but look envious. This bag must have been cast with a space spell such as a stretching spell, so that it can hold so many large owl models. What a good thing, if only it were mine. Qin Yu smacked his mouth and muttered to himself. As if sensing some malicious glances, Professor Swinton stuffed the bag into his open arms, covered it with the wizard's robe, and then disappeared in the blink of an eye. This made Qin Yu a little disappointed. Then, he saw brothers Fred and George, whose expressions were even more disappointed than his own, walking towards him. How is it? Did you get pouted? Qin Yu raised his eyebrows and said with some gloating. Who translates this sentence, as the saying goes, don't expose someone's shortcomings when you expose them, don't slap someone in the face when you hit someone. Qin Yu perfectly avoided this virtue. Don't say it so harshly. Angelina said politely that she had made an appointment with her friend a long time ago, so she rejected our invitation. Fred said dissatisfied. Yeah, who made us a step late? George said disappointedly. By the way, just now, Qin Yu and others discussed having a small party at Hagrid's cabin to celebrate the smooth progress of the selection, while Fred and George vigorously said that they would invite Angelina to go with them. After all, everyone was selected at the same time today, and they are considered as team members in the same period, so we can keep in touch and express feelings. Then, there is no more. Then wait until next time. Anyway, if we train together in the future, there will be plenty of opportunities. Qin Yu comforted the two guys with kindness. The two recovered instantly and led Elvis, Jimmy, Wilson, and Burke to the Hagrid cabin. Seeing the Weasley brothers vividly talking about the magical animals Hagrid took care of along the way, Qin Yu felt that it was unnecessary to comfort them. These two were born optimists. Of course, how can it be simple for someone who can live as an alien in the Weasley family? Thinking about these unfinished things, Qin Yu also followed everyone to the Hagrid hut. When Qin Yu and the others arrived at Hagrid's cabin, Hagrid, as the owner, had just decorated his simple living room. When he saw everyone coming, he rubbed his hands and said with a smile, "Boys, welcome to my place as a guest." "Thank you, Hagrid." Several children thanked them quickly. Then, they looked at the pile of candies on the table and couldn't take their eyes away. Before Qin Yu came, he had asked the owl to tell Hagrid in advance and asked him to help buy some candies. Hagrid thoughtfully bought several kinds and piled them on the table like a hill. Although the food at school is good, how could the children resist the temptation of candy? Gulu. I don't know who swallowed first. Advertisement then. Other people's grunts started. Without further ado, let's eat. Qin Yu picked up a BB multi-flavor bean and stuffed it into his mouth. After chewing it, my mouth was instantly filled with spicy taste. Hiss! Qin Yu took a breath, then frowned, chewed and swallowed hard. BB multi-flavor beans, if you eat them, you are not allowed to vomit. Whoever vomits will lose. Except for Qin Yu, everyone else also tried the candies with random flavors. After eating, their expressions were really various: bitter, spicy, sour, and sweet, clearly visible at a glance. The luckiest one was Wilson, who ate a strawberry-flavored one. Others were a little unlucky, and George choked with tears. After eating BB's multi-flavor beans, everyone picked their favorite candies and started eating them. Of course, after eating a certain amount of candy, people will be satisfied, and they will no longer be so enthusiastic about it, and they will not eat it without limit. At this time, the tea prepared by Hagrid himself was welcomed by everyone. Not to mention, Hagrid's cooking skills are disastrous, but the tea he makes is still good. Each of the children holds a cup and drinks tea while asking Hagrid about the furnishings in his house, especially the hairs of magical animals. The horns and other things made them full of curiosity. Of course, Qin Yu was not among them. He was sitting on the steps at the door of Hagrid's hut with a cup of tea in his hand, sipping the tea while looking at the setting sun. I don't know when, a little golden unicorn walked over with light steps. After approaching the hut, it neighed happily at Qin Yu. It's Anna the unicorn. Her arrival made several little kids go completely crazy. They looked at the elegant little beast from a distance, not daring to get too close for fear of disturbing her. At this time, George and Fred each took a carrot that had been washed clean and wiped off the surface moisture and walked over. However, Anna ignored them both and walked straight towards Qin Yu. The party at Hagrid's cabin ended on time before dinner started. Before the end, Charlie, who had packed up the Quidditch pitch, also came here. He first told his two precious brothers not to cause trouble for Hagrid, which elicited a slight response from George and Fred. Then, he told Qin Yu about this selection. Charlie said that Professor McGonagall suggested that Qin Yu play the position of seeker instead of batter. Why? Qin Yu was slightly startled. Because you are really fast. Charlie spread his hands and said, "No." Upon hearing this, Qin Yu shook his head violently and rejected the proposal. Before participating in this selection, Qin Yu actually had certain expectations for the seeker. He felt that this kind of position that could turn the situation around on his own was very awesome, because as long as the seeker caught the golden snitch, he could give him the team brought a huge score advantage of 150 points. However, after today's selection, he discovered that batsman was the position he wanted. Since Qin Yu insisted, Charlie naturally no longer pressed for it. After all, their team currently has no shortage of seekers. At worst, he could wait until he graduates next year and let Professor McGonagall convince him. So, before Hagrid was eager to show off his cooking skills, Qin Yu took a few little kids who didn't know what was going on and left Hagrid's hut. Chapter 39. Are you really not going to be a seeker? Seeker is a very popular position. Several people walked into the Gryffindor rest area. After Brother Charlie returned to his dormitory, George and Fred couldn't help but say to Qin Yu, "I'm really not that interested in seekers." After Qin Yu said this, he paused and then said seriously to the two of them, "I think a team is like a small army. The chaser is responsible for the frontal attack and is a powerful teacher. Looking for the ball the hand is a rare soldier, marching alone and winning by surprise. And the batsman is the sharpest spear and the most deadly weapon of this army. It is the strongest expression of a team's combat power. Instead of chasing a flying one, the little ball with wings is flying like a headless fly. I would rather wave the bat and kill everyone on the court. If the gods block the gods, the Buddhas will block the Buddhas. How cool it is. As he said this, he made a gesture of waving the bat and hitting hard, which was quite impressive. Sure enough, you think the same as us. The batter is the coolest position, George said with a sympathetic smile. Quidditch has no soul if it doesn't have a batter, Fred also said. The three heroes saw the same thing, and they stood shoulder to shoulder and dreamed about being invincible on the court in the future, and they were in a very happy mood. After the separation, Qin Yu thought that if he and the two brothers continued to hang out like this, they would most likely become more and more average. The topic of Quidditch selection was very lively for several days after the selection. Qin Yu has also become a minor celebrity in the school. At least when many people see him, they can recognize him as the batsman who guarded the big white owl on the day of selection. As for his name, most people really I don't know. After all, Qin Yu is just a freshman who has just entered school. Then, after a few days, the inertia of life brought everyone back to dullness and busyness again, and the Quidditch selection became a thing of the past. Everyone was doing whatever they were supposed to do, and started talking about other things and paying attention to other people. Of course, those classmates who were Qin Yu's fans are still keen to dig out all kinds of information about him. And Elvis remains the most important source of information. However, when Elvis told them that Qin Yu had a girlfriend who often wrote to him, these people's hearts were broken and they couldn't sweep it away. Then, some sad girls gave up some of their imaginations about Qin Yu and began to study to numb their wounded hearts. Of course, there are still some who still have no intention of giving up and feel that they are not without their own efforts. Let me ask, who is not a little magical princess? Qin Yu naturally had no way of knowing what these children were thinking, because he was really busy. After officially joining the Gryffindor Quidditch team, he started taking classes, after-school tutoring, and Quidditch training. Although he was a little busy, Qin Yu did not feel tired. On the contrary, he quickly adapted to such a life. Needless to say, classes are all about potions, herbal medicine, spells, transfiguration, etc. Each class is very fulfilling. The more Qin Yu learns, the more he can feel the charm of magic. Then, he relies on himself to surpass the knowledge and wild imagination of peers, raised strange questions to the teachers, interrupting the teacher's teaching rhythm again and again, and greatly hindered the normal teaching progress. Professor Sprout complained to other teachers more than once, saying that he might not be able to finish the semester's courses before the Christmas vacation, because Qin Yu had loaned out the herbs for teaching more than once, on the grounds that he needed to study the feasibility of cultivating them in large quantities. *X and some expensive herbs, he even took away them for the purpose of experiment and used them in large amounts. In terms of Quidditch training, Qin Yu, under Charlie's professional and careful guidance, systematically and standardizedly learned the commonly used tactical moves and made rapid progress. In just 2 weeks, he was able to cooperate with the regular players, and in one he performed well in the friendly training match with Ravenclaw, and the frustrated players in the Eagle Academy were wary of him one by one. Note: the symbolic animal of Ravenclaw is the eagle, so it is called the Eagle Court. After this friendly match, Professor McGonagall personally handed him a Nimbus 2000 broomstick, which moved Qin Yu inexplicably. However, Qin Yu later learned that the money used to buy the broom was the portion of the venom profits they turned over. He even found out that when Lao Deng approved the funding for the flying broom, he also quoted, "The wool comes from the sheep." This Eastern proverb made Qin Yu feel stuck in his chest when he heard it, and he didn't know how to spit it out. As for after-school tutoring, Professor Snape has ended the abuse of the Expelliarmus curse and has turned to teaching Qin Yu the more difficult Fire Curse and Stupefy Curse. Of these two spells, Qin Yu likes to use the Fire Curse the most because it is more enjoyable. After all, playing with water and setting fire are the two things boys like to do most since childhood. Of course, the huge power of the Fire Curse is also the reason why Qin Yu likes it. This curse can be used to attack when released, and can be defended when restrained. It can be said to be both offensive and defensive. Professor Snape said this to Qin Yu in awkward classical English. It is said that this sentence was left by the creator of the Fire Curse. It means that releasing the fire can attack the enemy, and concentrating the flame in front of the body can play a protective role, which is commonly known as the fire shield. Of course, it is easy to set a fire, but difficult to control it. Qin Yu can only use the dragon's fire-breathing trick at present. He is not very good at restraining the flames, and if he continues to practice, he will be burned bald by the out-of-control fire. Professor Swinton, on the other hand, had nothing to teach him about the two emotional training aspects of meditation and fear, So he started chatting with Qin Yu. Professor Swinton, does it seem unprofessional for us to chat and drink tea like this every day? Qin Yu finally said to Professor Swinton one night, who had prepared a bunch of tea. How can this be not doing your job properly? You must know that chatting is also a necessary way to adjust your emotions. When your thoughts collide with another person's thoughts, your understanding of the world will be more complete. Your three views will be more stable, and your will become stronger, Professor Swinton said seriously. Well, what you said does make sense. Qin Yu agreed deeply, and then ate a piece of pastry that seemed to be made of glutinous rice flour. Today, let's talk about astrology. By the way, what's your zodiac sign? Professor Swinton asked. Taurus. My birthday is May 5th. After Qin Yu said this, he took a sip of tea. I guessed it right. By the way, I'm a Gemini. Professor Swinton pointed at himself and said, I don't care. Professor, I heard that astrology is a superstition in the Muggle world. Is it necessary for us to discuss this? Qin Yu finally couldn't help but said, your understanding is a bit one-sided. Although constellations have a superstitious side, they are actually a category that can be explained by psychology. Systematic and ritualistic things will give people an instinctive sense of trust. In constellations, the theory is like this. Once people have trust in the constellation theory, it will naturally affect their behavior in a subtle way. And this influence, I think, has the effect of seeking advantages and avoiding disadvantages, and guiding evil to good. If we only look at it in terms of superstition, is not profound and comprehensive enough? Professor Swinton spoke of his theory in a very logical manner. Advertisement Qin Yu listened while drinking tea, nodding from time to time. Well, what's the difference between this and his previous life where he was chatting in a group of people and talking about shit? Time passed by unconsciously like this, and Qin Yu felt like he understood something, but also felt like he didn't understand anything at all. Okay, that's all for today. You can go back. Professor Swinton, who was thirsty for words, drank all the tea in the cup with satisfaction and sent Qin Yu away. The next night, Qin Yu came over on time. Qin, today, let's talk about what's hidden in the drama. Professor Swinton cleared his throat and spoke seriously. Wait a minute, Professor Swinton, before we talk about this, can you help me look at something? I've been studying it for a long time, but I still don't understand its principle. Qin Yu interrupted Professor Swinton and took out a small items. Oh, what is this? Professor Swinton asked curiously. A friend gave me a handicraft. I once put a grape and a cherry in it. They can stay fresh for a long time. Qin Yu said this and handed over the small object. Yes, this is the little pyramid that Bill gave to Qin Yu. He really felt that chatting dryly every day was a waste of time and a waste of Hogwarts teaching staff. He might as well ask Professor Swinton for advice. And Qin Yu, I have been playing around with this little pyramid recently, trying to figure out how it works so that I can make a bigger one so that he can store more fruits. The purpose is simple and practical. That's it. Professor Swinton took the small pyramid and looked at it over and over in his hand. Then, his eyes became brighter and brighter as he looked at it, and he murmured, Wow, it's from the Egyptian Alchemy Research Center. I haven't seen them make new stuff for a long time. No, Chain the gold material belongs to them, and the magic spell here is obviously not Cairo's system. It's a bit interesting. The operation of magic has the charm of classical magic. Well, Professor, can you tell me how this thing works? Qin Yu interrupted at the right time, pulling Professor Swinton back from his own world. Oh, what's the purpose of wanting to know how it works? Professor Swinton asked rhetorically without answering. Well, I just want to make one myself. If possible, I want to make it bigger, about this big, Qin Yu said, reaching out to make a sign that was more than 1 meter tall. Well, this is not easy, Professor Swinton said with a smile. His words did not deny that he understood how the pyramid worked. So, are you willing to teach me? Qin Yu said expectantly. Professor Swinton did not answer immediately, but waved his wand and put away the tea and snacks instantly. Then, he straightened the front of the wizard's robe, straightened his body, and said solemnly to Qin Yu, Before I teach you, please allow me to introduce myself. Qin Yu. I, Stephen Isaac Swinton, am the 109th official student of the great alchemist Nicholas Flamel. I am in awe of the great alchemy and am willing to experience it with the most pious heart. The holiness of creation. Professor Swinton said this in a very formal tone. Okay. The process is over. Professor Swinton returned to normal instantly. Seeing Qin Yu still looking confused, Professor Swinton smiled and explained. What I want to teach you next is alchemy. And alchemy is a subject that requires a sense of ritual. because only a devout alchemist can glimpse the power of the Creator and refine the legendary magic stone that can turn stones into gold and make people immortal. Magic stone? Qin Yu's heart suddenly trembled when he heard this. I just want to get a fresh-keeping refrigerator. Why do I have to involve the magic stone? Of course, I am definitely not teaching you how to refine the Philosopher's Stone. I can't even do it myself. The only person in the world who can refine the Philosopher's Stone is my teacher Nico Flammel, and I can teach you about it. It's about how to make this pyramid out of materials. This is relatively basic alchemy, and I will try to teach you to copy the magic spell inside. Professor Swinton shrugged after looking at Qin Yu's expression. Oh, that's it. Then, thank you for being willing to teach me. After Qin Yu said this, he said hesitantly, well, I need to do what you just did too. Want to play a part? Ha ha ha, no. This is a ritual that my teacher requires us formal students to do. In fact, you just need to treat alchemy with a serious heart. Professor Swinton waved his hand and said with a smile. I will definitely take it seriously, Qin Yu said quickly. Then, Professor Swinton picked up the small pyramid again, observed it and said happily, well, I finally have something to do. When Qin Yu heard this, he couldn't help but thought to himself, so you were really just talking nonsense with me all day long because you were bored and had nothing to do, right? Of course, this cannot be said. Oh, yes, you must have a pious and serious heart. Qin Yu drove away those thoughts of complaining and listened carefully to Professor Swinton's next explanation. In this way, Qin Yu's leisure time of drinking tea and chatting in Professor Swinton's office was gone and became more fulfilling. It had to be said that alchemy was not as easy as he thought. He needed to learn a lot of theoretical knowledge, which made him read books even when he returned to his dormitory. These books included some basic alchemy textbooks and a series of books. Professor Ben Swinton's Alchemy Notes. With such a busy life, Qin Yu writes letters to Hermione less frequently. However, the little girl seriously stated that study is the most important thing, and he can write less frequently. However, the number of letters Trig brought from Hermione did not decrease, because this owl has formed the habit of flying regularly between the two places at some point. Even if there is no mission to deliver letters, it will fly empty to Granger's house, and then eat some toast and ham, and then take little Hermione with him. The letter flew back. Time is like sand, and like a horse racing in front of the window. When the maple forest outside the castle sheds its last leaves, the cold wind begins to blow, and Hogwarts enters the late autumn season. Chapter 40. Aragog is back, Hagrid said to Qin Yu with a relieved but apologetic tone. The uncle had just returned from the Forbidden Forest, and his thick coat seemed to still carry the chill of the mountain forest. Who? Qin Yu, who was helping Unicorn Kelly comb her mane, didn't react for a while after hearing Hagrid's words. It's the old acromantula that escaped, Hagrid explained, and stretched out his 2 hands to scratch, imitating the 8 legs of the acromantula. Qin Yu took off the unicorn hairs hanging on the comb one by one, handed them to Fred next to him, and asked the latter to collect them carefully. He then nodded suddenly and said, It turns out that isn't it? Has this old guy run away from home? To be honest, Qin Yu really doesn't have a good impression of this acromantula. When he accidentally entered the spider cave, he had clearly made it clear to it that he was Hagrid's friend. However, this guy was still there. Commit murder. If it were someone without a system, wouldn't it just hang there? The old guy might not hurt anyone, but its indifference when it saw Qin Yu and the little unicorn in danger that day still made it hard for Qin Yu to let go. Therefore, Qin Yu always used it as a title. Well, Aragog didn't have a good life after he escaped. He was almost killed when he passed by a gathering place of centaurs. Now that the weather has turned cold, he has come back quietly. I also just want to ban him. He only discovered it when Lynn was on patrol. After Hagrid said this, he added, He also specifically told me not to tell you about his return. George. Fred, I won't let you tell Qin, so why don't you tell me? The 2 brothers murmured in their hearts at the same time. Humph, are you still afraid that I can't eradicate it? Qin Yu said angrily. Probably because of such worries, Aragog said that you were too scary at the time. If he didn't run in time, he would definitely die. Hagrid nodded with deep understanding. Qin Yu Xiao rolled his eyes, and while giving the unicorn Kelly a mid-parted look, he said coldly, Go and tell it. Since it didn't hurt me then, I won't hurt it, by the way. You tell it that this is for your sake, Uncle Hagrid. Also, its descendants are responsible for their own evil, and the bodies belong to us. If it has any objections to this, I can talk to it. George and Fred listened and nodded fiercely. The venom of Acromantula is quite easy to sell, and they already have wizard customers as far away as Brazil. I can guarantee that Aragog will never have any objections to this. His children have long been wild and untamable. They have completely different habits from him. Even he himself has difficulty restraining them, Hagrid said to Qin Yu, and the Weasley brothers said. Qin Yu probably understood what Hagrid said. Aragog was raised by Hagrid. He is equivalent to a husky raised in the Muggle world. Although he is fierce, he can listen to people's words, while Aragog's children are all wild. They are ferocious and ignorant beasts, equivalent to wild dogs and wolves. One is a pet, and the other is a beast. Hagrid naturally has feelings for Aragog, but he does not have the slightest sympathy for those beasts, and the same is true for Aragog. After all, he has too many descendants, and he has too much sympathy. What? Well, it's nothing. Just let it continue to live in its home. After Qin Yu said this, he seemed to remember something, and then said to Hagrid, "Tell it again, and you will be there in the future. My friends come in, and let it take a good look at its little cubs. If someone is injured, I don't mind blowing up the spider hole again. At that time, I'll see if it can successfully escape again." Of course, Qin Yu would not casually use the power of Obscurus to blow up spider holes, but he could still scare him. It was just a big bug. Could it be that he still knew the idiom that a soldier never tires of deceit? "I will definitely bring the words to you." Hearing this, Hagrid nodded solemnly and said. Qin Yu and the others obtained the venom and used the venom to slightly open up the market in the magical world. Aragog also obtained Qin Yu's temporary understanding and warning under Hagrid's lobbying. The Acromantula incident was finally brought to an end. A happy ending, probably. Brothers George and Fred felt relieved, and Hagrid also returned to the Forbidden Forest to tell Aragog what Qin Yu had said. The only person at the scene who was dissatisfied was the little unicorn Anna. When Qin Yu was combing the big unicorn's brown fur, she had already been impatient and circled around it. The appearance of Hagrid directly slowed down Qin Yu's progress in styling her mother, which made her a little angry. At this time, Hagrid finally left, and Qin Yu also gave Unicorn Kelly a middle-parted comb that would satisfy even an obsessive-compulsive disorder. Then, the little unicorn hurried over and asked Qin Yu to do it for her too. Seeing her like this, Qin Yu smiled for a while. So, he took off the last white unicorn hair from the comb, handed it to the Weasley brothers to put away, and then began to comb the little unicorn Anna's hair. The Weasley brothers are not accepted by the unicorns when it comes to grooming their brown fur. As for the combed golden unicorn hair, there is no need to collect it. Well, Ollivander doesn't collect it. However, when Qin Yu was combing her hair, the little unicorn enthusiastically reminded Qin Yu to collect her golden fur as well. In order to prevent Anna from feeling that her hair was not as useful as her mother's, Qin Yu asked George and the others to change a bag to contain the golden animal hair. One Friday afternoon passed like this. Qin Yu stayed with the unicorns and helped them comb their manes, which was a half-day break, while brothers George and Fred were very satisfied with the unicorn hairs they collected. Then, when Hagrid came back from the Forbidden Forest again and brought back Aragog's guarantee, Qin Yu and the Weasley brothers left Hagrid's cabin and returned to Hogwarts Castle. Advertisement. On the way back, George and Fred walked in front, while Qin Yu followed behind and walked slowly, thinking about recent events. Then, he unexpectedly thought of the old Acromantula Aragog. Thinking of Aragog, Qin Yu naturally thought of the system that could save his life. By the way, since the Acromantula incident, it seems that there has been no movement in this system, and I don't know where it went. Is it due to arrears? Thinking of this, Qin Yu couldn't help but stop and mutter in his heart, System, are you still there? If you are, just say a word. After waiting for 5 seconds, Qin Yu did not get a response. And just when he was about to leave, a voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Squeak. Qin Yu. Qin Yu was speechless for a moment, and after a long pause, he said helplessly in his heart, Your work efficiency has not been good recently. How long has it been since you released a selection task? I don't even have any extra income. I just rely on hard work to make money. It's really tiring. Ding. It has been detected that the host has a strong desire for adventure. Would you like to enable the S-level difficulty world mode? The system voice sounded. S-level difficulty world mode? What the hell? The system's words surprised Qin Yu. In this mode, the world will fall into the highest level of chaos. In this case, the host will be in danger all the time, and I will be able to frequently issue selected tasks. The system explained in a mechanical voice without any emotion. You mean, as long as I want to commit suicide, You will show up to choose the task? Qin Yu was stunned for a long time and asked after smacking his mouth a few times. The system replied, "You understand it very accurately. Do you want to enable the S-level difficulty world mode? You have 5 seconds to make a choice. If you do not respond within the specified time, it will be enabled by default and the 5-second countdown will begin. 5, 4, 3. Shit. Open your sister." "No." Qin Yu said urgently. "Good guy. I'm living a really good life. Why don't you give me an S-level difficulty? Do you think I don't have enough life?" Ding. The host's reply has been received, and the current difficulty world mode is temporarily maintained. The system sounded. Then, the system added, "If the host wants to open a world mode with a higher difficulty level, please summon me at any time." When Qin Yu heard this, he rolled his eyes and said, "I don't have any masochistic tendencies. I'll just switch to a high difficulty mode. Then don't summon me." The system replied, "Well, okay, Wait, why do you think your words are emotional? Are you trying to criticize me?" Qin Yu asked excitedly. "Do you have similar human emotions?" Qin Yu continued to ask. However, the system did not make any reply, not even a chirp. After trying for a while, Qin Yu gave up decisively because he was really afraid of offending the system. If it directly went to S-level difficulty mode, it would be enough for him to drink a pot. At least, he is quite satisfied with his current life and does not need to add any higher level of difficulty. The cold wind in the evening blew across the hillside, and Qin Yu shrank his neck from the cold. After George and Fred greeted them from a distance, he took a few steps to catch up. Sitting at the dining table, after drinking some hot tomato soup, Qin Yu felt very comfortable, and his whole stomach was warm. Then, after eating 2 pies and a piece of potato, Qin Yu left the auditorium and went to the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office on the 3rd floor. And here, after Professor Swinton decided to teach Qin Yu alchemy, it became very crowded and filled with all kinds of alchemy materials and alchemy equipment. When Qin Yu knocked on the door and entered, Professor Swinton said quite proudly, "You came just in time. I have cracked the material formula of the Egyptian Alchemy Research Center, and we can start refining it. It was a bit stuck, and then I flipped through the book, checked the information, and sorted out the plot, which wasted time. Then, thank you all for your reminders, comments, and rewards. The author is flattered by your love, and I will try my best to write this book." Chapter 41. Professor Swinton, you are indeed a knowledgeable and super genius. You have cracked the formula of this alchemy material in such a short period of time. As your student, I am really proud. Qin Yu said seriously. Haha, that's an exaggeration. I'm still far away from my teacher, Mr. Flammel. This matter is not worth mentioning. Professor Swinton waved his hand rather proudly. Of course, the corners of his mouth turned up to show that he was very happy. If it were Professor Snape, if he had listened to Qin Yu's words, he would have rolled his eyes at him and said coldly, "You are good at flattering. Why don't you review the spells I taught you?" Professor Swinton, on the other hand, is more shameless. He handles it calmly. In other words, Qin Yu has been following Professor Swinton recently to learn the theoretical knowledge of alchemy and do some simple alchemical operations, such as blackening, yellowing, and whitening that are common in alchemy, and how to do it specifically. Obtain pure cinnabar, etc. Professor Swinton himself, while teaching Qin Yu, devoted almost all his remaining energy to the reverse derivation of the alchemy material used in the small pyramid, so much so that even the Defense Against Dark Arts class he taught became absent-minded. It had been a long time since his classmates had been frightened by those disgusting pictures, and their appetites had become much better. Now, after many days of research, Professor Swinton finally figured out the composition of this material, which really took a lot of effort. Okay, Qin, don't be stunned. Let's start doing it. I can't wait. Professor Swinton rubbed his hands and said to Qin Yu with bright eyes. Qin Yu. Although he understood Professor Swinton's enthusiasm for alchemy, Qin Yu always felt that his words coupled with his expression really made people want to turn around and leave immediately. How could Professor Swinton know Qin Yu's mental activities at this time? Without saying a word, he handed Qin Yu a set of alchemist uniforms in the room, and he himself waved his wand and changed into the same costumes. This is a robe with a simple pattern. After Qin Yu put it on, he and Professor Swinton came to the alchemy materials and alchemy equipment. Test you, what is alchemy? Professor Swinton asked solemnly before officially starting. Alchemy is the blending and exploration of the 4 elements of earth, wind, water, and fire. It is the use of these elements to create more noble substances and even life. Qin Yu said the definition of alchemy. Yes, Nobility comes from tempering and tempering. The four most primitive elements in heaven and earth are reborn from fire and various tribulations, Professor Swinton said with a pious look. After saying this, Professor Swinton directed Qin Yu to start making some preparations and pre-processing the required materials. Qin Yu has done these pre-processing operations many times, and they are not difficult to do. By the time Qin Yu finished processing the materials, Professor Swinton had already set up the alchemy cauldron, with blue flames burning underneath. Then, Professor Swinton asked Qin Yu to put the pre-processed materials into the alchemy cauldron one by one in order, while he waved his wand to control the intensity of the flame and the flow of materials in the alchemy cauldron. As Qin Yu put in the last material, the material in the alchemy cauldron turned into a liquid of mixed colors. At this time, Professor Swinton released a magic spell to suddenly increase the temperature of the flame. Then he took out a transparent glass bottle containing white powder from his cherished arms. Then, he opened the cork of the glass bottle and poured in about 1/3 of the bottle of white powder was poured into the alchemy cauldron. This is the alchemy catalyst given to me by Mr. Lame. It can save a lot of troublesome steps, Professor Swinton explained to Qin Yu, who was a little confused. Hearing this, Qin Yu nodded and continued to look at the reaction in the alchemy cauldron. As the white powder was poured in, the originally chaotic molten liquid reacted violently and began to intertwine and fuse with each other as if it were alive. The color of the liquid gradually became unified until, advertisement, it turned golden. Golden? That is the color of gold. Of course, Qin Yu knew that what they were refining was definitely not gold, but a substance more noble than gold. Professor Swinton, who was always paying attention to the changes in the alchemy cauldron, after seeing that the color of the liquid reached his requirements, he waved his wand and gradually weakened the flames under the cauldron until it was extinguished. The whole process was very cautious, not daring to go too fast. Don't dare to be too slow. After the flames were completely extinguished, Professor Swinton cast a levitation spell on the pool of golden liquid. The liquid rose from the cauldron and turned into a round golden ball as big as a quaffle when it reached the air. As the ball rotates in the air, it gradually changes from liquid to solid, leaving shallow cloud-like patterns on the surface of the ball. "Qin, catch it!" Professor Swinton shouted, raising his voice. Upon hearing this, Qin Yu quickly stretched out his hands. The golden ball slowly fell under the control of Professor Swinton and finally landed in Qin Yu's hand. The moment his hands touched the ball, Qin Yu seemed to feel the breath of life coming from the golden ball. Alchemy is indeed a magical subject, Qin Yu thought in his heart. The successful refining of the alchemy material is the first step in making the pyramid. They will use this newly made alchemy material to forge the 5 sides of the pyramid. The next step is to replicate the magic spell on the small pyramid on the 5 sides of the pyramid. This is a very ancient magic spell that uses some ancient incantations. Your friend is really talented at being able to carve these incantations into the pyramid, Professor Swinton said to Qin Yu. Well, Bill is indeed very powerful. I can't even imitate those spells. Qin Yu nodded. Haha, drawing a mantra is not just about drawing it as it appears. You also need to sense the flow of the mantra. Otherwise, even if you draw it as it is, it won't have any effect, Professor Swinton said with a smile. It sounds a bit troublesome, Qin Yu said with a shrug. Yes, it is said that these incantations were drawn by ancient wizards after they sensed the mysterious sound. Of course, we don't need to be like them to copy now, as long as we can roughly imitate it. I'm afraid I won't be able to handle this on my own, so I'll have to find someone for help. The first person that Professor Swinton could think of was, of course, Professor Dumbledore. However, he immediately rejected the idea because he did not want Dumbledore to waste his energy on such a trivial matter. Then, Professor Snape became the best candidate besides Professor Dumbledore. Qin Yu couldn't help much with this matter, so he left it to Professor Swinton and Professor Snape to study it. 5 days later in the evening, Qin Yu was called to the office by Professor Swinton. In the middle of that office, there is a golden pyramid more than 1 meter high. Professor Swinton and Professor Snape, one with a smile and the other with a cold face, stood on both sides of the pyramid like sphinxes. Chapter 42. Looking at the large pyramid in front of him, Qin Yu felt like he was looking at a piece of art. It is so beautiful. The golden regular edges seem to be flowing with brilliance, which is dazzling. Then, he looked at the 2 teachers who were obviously a little tired. Qin Yu suddenly thought of this sentence. I have been struggling for a long time just for a fresh-keeping refrigerator. Isn't it too much work? You see, Professor Snape is very tired, and his originally black and smooth long hair has become a little dry and split. Qin Yu looked at Professor Snape somewhat sadly. After Snape noticed his gaze, he rolled his eyes and said coldly, "Although I don't know what you are thinking, if you continue to look at me like this, I can't guarantee that you will be killed. Throw it out of the third-floor window. Hey, I just think you look very haggard. You and Professor Swinton have really worked hard during this time." Qin Yu said sincerely with a playful smile. "I don't find it hard to do research. On the contrary, you should have a correct attitude and not be afraid of difficulties when doing things," Professor Snape continued to say in a cold tone. "Yeah, I understand." Qin Yu nodded quickly and said, "Okay, Severus, the teaching time is over. It's time to show our research results over the past few days." Professor Swinton interrupted at the right time.
Yes.
Snape heard this and nodded in agreement. Then, Professor Swinton and Professor Snape took a step to both sides at the same time, while the former waved his wand and pointed at the pyramid. A golden panel of the pyramid then slowly flew up and suspended in midair, revealing the hollow internal structure inside. And there was an exquisite porcelain plate with several fruits, including an apple, 3 bananas, a bunch of grapes, and 2 avocados. Looking at Swinton with a proud look on his face and Snape with a slightly raised chin, Qin Yu lamented in his heart, "I am indeed a sinner. I shouldn't trouble these 2 big guys to do this. Isn't this overkill?" Although he thought so in his heart, he certainly couldn't show such emotions on his face. The efficiency of the 2 teachers' cooperation is so high. I didn't expect that the magic spell of the small pyramid could be reproduced so quickly, Qin Yu said with great admiration. This worship is indeed true. Qin Yu himself is also studying the incantations in these pyramids. However, he can only barely sketch a rough outline. But there is no flow of magic power at all, let alone the expected effect. Now, looking at the interior of the pyramid transmitting magic fluctuations, Qin Yu truly felt what Professor Swinton called the breath of classical magic. Reproduction? Do you think the 2 of us would do such a low-level thing? Professor Snape sneered and said proudly. Huh, isn't it? Qin Yu was slightly startled. Professor Snape was too lazy to answer his question. Instead, he stretched out his wand and tapped the top of the pyramid. Then he moved his mouth and recited a spell, and a thin cold air quickly appeared in the pyramid. As the cold air filled the air, Qin Yu heard the sound of ice crystals solidifying in his ears, and ice condensed on the inner walls of the pyramid made of alchemy material at a speed visible to the naked eye. Looking at the fruits on the plate, they are already covered with a layer of frost, obviously frozen. Hiss, what is the effect of quick freezing? Qin Yu looked at the 2 professors in disbelief. By the way, the small pyramid that Bill gave Qin Yu also had a preservation function, and the magical aura was not very strong. However, the current large pyramid not only has a strong magical aura, but also has a quick freezing effect. This has to be. Qin Yu was a little surprised. Severus, you agreed that I would demonstrate. How could you do this? Professor Swinton said angrily. Does it matter who demonstrated it? Professor Snape said calmly. Of course there is a difference. How can I establish a tall and positive image in front of students like this? Professor Swinton argued. Oh, then if you are willing, you can demonstrate it again. Snape said. What's the use of doing it again? Can the effect of the first demonstration be more shocking? Swinton said angrily. You didn't say how many times you would demonstrate before. Snape said sharply. You are quibbling. Professor Swinton said through gritted teeth. Whatever you say. Snape folded his hands on his waist and said indifferently. Qin Yu couldn't help raising his hand, interrupting the conversation between the 2. Say, Qin, don't you like him too? The 2 professors said at the same time. Well, I want to say that no matter who performs the demonstration, the image of the 2 teachers in my heart is glorious and great. It is you who let me know the wisdom and magical qualities that a good wizard should have. Can you become? It is my greatest honor to be my student. Master Qin Duanxue, you said sincerely. Advertisement. When Professor Swinton heard this, his expression immediately softened a lot, and Professor Snape also snorted and said nothing more. So, can any of you tell me the principle of this curse? I really want to know. Qin Yu said to the 2 of them. Of course I will tell you. Professor Swinton said first. Then, he pointed to the open pyramid with a thick layer of frost on the inside and began to explain. First of all, the alchemy material used by your friend is actually a low-quality material refined by the Egyptian Alchemy Research Center. It doesn't cost much, and the quality of the material we refined before is much higher. Then, although the magic spells he drew inside the small pyramid had certain preservation and antiseptic effects, they did not bring out the maximum value of those ancient spells. This is also a problem that Professor Snape and I have been overcoming recently. Now, we can say that we have thoroughly researched and developed 80% of the abilities of those spells. Therefore, in addition to keeping fresh, we can also freeze it quickly. After Professor Swinton finished speaking, Snape nodded and added, "Many of these incantations play a role in converting magic power. If you want to understand the working principle of the pyramid, you need to understand and study each incantation to know what stage of magic are they in." "It sounds very complicated," Qin Yu said after licking his lips a few times. "It's quite complicated, but with us here, we can definitely teach you," Professor Swinton said confidently. "Then thank you two teachers." Qin Yu thanked him quickly. Of course, there is no time to explain in detail today, and Qin Yu also saw that the two professors were very tired from studying these mantras recently, so he took the initiative to start the formal study tomorrow. Naturally, the two professors had no objections. After all, they were not in a hurry. In the following days, Qin Yu began to learn this ancient mantra under the guidance of the two teachers. The process went smoothly, but was a bit boring. Fortunately, Qin Yu thought it was quite interesting to see Professor Swinton and Professor Snape arguing like two children over some trivial matters from time to time, which relieved his boredom. Of course, he felt more about the mystery and power of these spells, as well as the profound magical attainments of the two professors. One day, the three of them were drinking strong tea and eating fruits taken out of the pyramid. Professor Snape looked at the thing they had been studying and murmured, "Are we working hard for so long just to store fruits? Huh, have you finally discovered this?" Qin Yu twitched the corner of his mouth, thinking awkwardly in his heart. "What's going on? Is there anything wrong?" Professor Swinton asked with some confusion. "There's nothing wrong. I'm just suddenly curious about how much money you spend on this pyramid," Snape said slowly. When Qin Yu heard this, he also looked at Professor Swinton curiously. He only knew that the alchemy materials must be valuable, but he didn't know how much they were worth. "How much does it cost? Let me think about it." "The materials used in alchemy are probably worth 2,000 to 3,000 gold galleons, or maybe a little more." Professor Swinton thought for a while and said, 2,000 or 3,000 gold galleons. Qin Yu was a little dumbfounded when he heard this. They sold acromantula venom for an autumn, but they didn't make so much money, right? This was not over yet. Professor Swinton continued to say, "As for the catalyst that Mr. Flammel gave me for the alchemy, there is no way to use money to measure it. After all, that thing cannot be bought on the market. It is Lemay's catalyst, the crystallization of your excellency May's wisdom. You know, the crystallization of wisdom of the greatest alchemist in the world is so precious, and you just used it right then?" Qin Yu complained helplessly in his heart. "Of course, the most valuable thing here is the hard work of you and me, and those wonderful ideas that Qin occasionally puts forward," Professor Swinton finally said with pride. These words were quite beautiful, but Qin Yu thought about it and couldn't help but said, "Professor Swinton, how about I return the money to you later? I definitely can't afford Mr. Flammel's catalyst. At least I'll give you the money for the alchemy material." "Haha, Qin, do you really think I'm bored playing with you?" Professor Swinton said with a smile. "Isn't it? Ahem, definitely not." Qin Yu corrected himself in time. "Of course, there is indeed a reason why I have nothing to do and want to kill time, but after coming into contact with the small pyramid, I also have a strong desire to copy it or even surpass it. As a wizard, encountering such a naturally, we have to go all out. After all, only with this desire to explore can we make progress," Professor Swinton said seriously. "Well, during this process, I also learned a lot and gained a better understanding of magic," Professor Snape interjected. "Yes, you see, your Professor Snape has the same idea as me. We did only make a pyramid to store fruits, but that doesn't mean we can only do this. Are you right, my dear?" "Qin," Professor Swinton said with a smile. "It seems to make sense, but there are so many gold galleons. Money is not important to me." After Professor Swinton said this, he paused and then continued, "Because I really have a lot of money." Qin Yu was a little stunned. He really didn't expect that Professor Swinton, who was usually very low-key, was actually a rich man, which somewhat subverted Qin Yu's cognition. Swinton on the River Devon in Yorkshire?" Snape frowned slightly and muttered, "Ha, you discovered it." Professor Swinton showed a funny expression after his identity was revealed. However, for some reason, Qin Yu felt that there was some unspeakable loneliness hidden in his smile. Chapter 43. In the attic with the large glass windows full of sunlight, a little girl with brown hair and beautiful eyes was tidying up the room seriously. In fact, There weren't many things in the room, because its owner didn't live here for too long. He didn't even live here until the weather got cooler, so he left here temporarily and went to a place she couldn't find on the map. Place. Therefore, the clothes here only include spring clothes and summer clothes, not much, just a few pieces. However, she still carefully folded the few pieces of clothes that had been dried by the sun and put them into the wardrobe that was not too big. Then, she arranged some things in the room according to the layout she thought was good, such as the location of the coat rack, where the vases would look best, and where the books, stationery, and cups used by the owner of the room should be. How to place it on the table. Of course, the floors still need to be cleaned. After all, even if no one lives here, dust will continue to fall. After finishing this, she clapped her hands, looked around, and smiled with satisfaction. As she looked around, she finally landed on a standing photo frame on the desk. In the photo frame is a magical moving photo. In it is a boy wearing a red-lined robe. He is flying in the sky on a broom. At a certain moment, he turned around and looked at the girl with a smile. On her side, looking at the boy looking at her, the little girl pursed her lips and raised the corners of her mouth slightly. "How are you doing?" She silently recited this sentence in her heart that she had written countless times in letters. Then, her eyes slid from the photo album, looked out the window, and looked into the distance. "Well, I miss him a little bit. This kind of missing is not as strong as when he just left. I won't secretly hide in the room and cry because of his sudden absence and pretend in front of my parents that I don't care at all about his departure. This kind of thinking is just like eating, sleeping, or breathing. It is very ordinary, but you can't help but do it subconsciously, as if it has become a habit when your brain is free. Then, imagine what he is doing and what he is thinking at this time. Do you occasionally think about the little girl who once studied, ate, and played with him like you did? Of course, most of the time. I just simply imagined his eyebrows, his smile, and his voice. It's strange to say that some people who have known her for a long time are strangers to each other, or even like enemies, such as those girls who often laugh at her, tease her, and are now vaguely afraid of her. And some people, who they had only known each other for a short time, fiercely broke into her world, came to her side, and then told her to be a strong and courageous person, to be a quick person. Happy people. She missed him, not because of his handsomeness or his intelligence, but because he made her a better version of herself. At least, today, she will not feel sorry for herself because of some people's stupid ridicule, nor will she argue red-faced because of their malicious slander, because, he told her, people do not live by other people's words. He also told her that arguing with a fool will only make you a fool. "Ha! You are so eloquent. You must have left many people speechless at school." The little girl said this and couldn't help but poke the moving photo with her hand. The little man inside immediately rode his broom and ducked to the side to avoid the risk of being poked from the sky. Growling. Looking at the little man, the little girl laughed out loud. "Sorry, I shouldn't bully you. You can stay here peacefully. I will help you wipe the dust from time to time," the little girl said to the boy in the photo. The boy rolled his eyes and continued flying on his broom in the sky in the photo. "Hermione, have you packed Qin's room? It's time for us to set off." Mom's voice sounded downstairs. "Okay, Mom, I'm done. Let's get down now," the little girl responded quickly. This little girl is, of course, Hermione Jane Granger, the daughter of the Granger family. By the way, Halloween is coming soon, and the Granger family has become a little lively because of the holiday. Advertisement: when cleaning the house, Hermione took out Qin Yu's clothes to dry again, and then tidied his room again. "The next activity is to go to the supermarket with my parents to buy some Halloween decorations and cooking ingredients for dinner. Of course, the most important thing is pumpkins." After coming downstairs, Hermione changed her shoes and put on a thick coat, went out with her parents, and took Mr. Granger's car to the nearest large shopping mall in their community. This shopping mall has a full range of goods and has always been the hottest commercial place in the surrounding area. Now that Halloween is approaching, there are even more people. Many people are like the Granger family and come to buy things for Halloween. The Grangers made their way through the somewhat bustling crowd. Looking at the adults and children around who were smiling because of the holiday, Mrs. Granger couldn't help but sigh and said, "Oh, it would be great if Qin was here, so that we can spend Halloween together. She missed that little boy a little. What a cute and good child." Upon hearing this, Mr. Granger immediately held the back of his wife's hand and motioned her to speak more cautiously with a reproachful look. Mrs. Granger immediately understood what her husband meant and looked at her daughter next to her with some apprehension. However, the daughter did not look sad as expected, but smiled and said, "It's okay." Qin said, "He will be back for Christmas, and we can spend Christmas together then? Well, let's spend Christmas together. Mrs. Granger also smiled after hearing this. Then, she subconsciously looked at her husband, and Mr. Granger happened to look at her at this time. Their eyes met, and they both saw the unexpected look in each other's eyes. Yes, their daughter seems to have grown up. She is no longer as fragile and sensitive as before, and has become much stronger and more confident. The two of them had this thought in their minds at the same time. Next, the family of three entered the supermarket in the mall and put the things they wanted to buy into the shopping cart according to the item list. These include apples, toffee, lamb chops, beef, potatoes, carrots, and so on. Then, when she arrived at the shelf where the pile of pumpkins were, Hermione carefully selected 2 pumpkins of similar sizes and said that she would make pumpkin lanterns by herself when she went back, and named one of them Qin Lantern. Well, the other one was naturally Hermione Lights Up. This caused the Grangers to smile. After shopping around the supermarket and buying some good things, the Granger family drove back. It was getting late at this time, and street lights were already on both sides of the street, as well as Halloween-specific lighting decorations at the entrances of businesses. Some of the pedestrians walking on the street had already put on weird Halloween clothes in advance. The festive atmosphere is getting stronger and stronger. When they drove back home, they unexpectedly saw the owl Trig squatting on the lamppost at the door. When Hermione saw it, she immediately opened the car door and ran out of the car quickly. She quickly called Trig home and received a letter from him. Then, as usual, she went back to her room to read the letter. Entering the room and sitting on the chair next to the desk, Hermione couldn't help but put it to her nose and sniff it deeply before opening the envelope. With the smell of the special brown paper on the envelope, Hermione found that something was overflowing in her heart. What she thought was a plain longing suddenly spread at this moment and became hot and intense. Dimensional wall. Note: Nianzi Zai is an idiom I did not coin. Chapter 44. On the eve of Halloween, Qin Yu came to the auditorium early in the morning, smelling the scent of roasted pumpkins. Not long after I sat down, a group of owls flew in like a swarm and dropped letters or packages to the recipients. The whole auditorium suddenly became noisy. Obviously, the postman is particularly busy today, and Qin Yu also received a tightly wrapped package the size of a school bag. As expected, he saw Hermione's handwriting on the package. Then, after opening the package, he saw a red sweater and a pair of brown woolen gloves. After reading Hermione's attached letter, he learned that Mrs. Granger had bought the sweater and that Hermione had knitted the gloves herself. Because he said that the representative color of Gryffindor House is red and Hermione's hair is brown, so he chose these 2 colors. TSK, red sweater. Qin Yu didn't know what to say for a while. It was such an eye-catching color, but fortunately he was still a child. If it had been in his previous life, he would not have dared to wear it. As for the gloves, even though they are a little ugly, they are still very warm on your hands. You can wear them in winter. Hermione also mentioned in her letter their preparations for Halloween and that she was making 2 beautiful pumpkin lanterns, which made Qin Yu feel the festive atmosphere. Because of the festival, the students were a little absent-minded in class throughout the day, thinking about the banquet in the evening. As a result, in the potions class, someone got the wrong amount of milk thistle powder and added a tablespoon, which caused a very strange smell to permeate the entire basement. Professor Snape scolded him for this. The careless student then cast a magic spell with great experience to remove the smell from the entire space. After a short period of stuffiness, everyone felt that they could breathe fresh air again. Finally, when the last class in the afternoon ended, everyone immediately walked onto the ground excitedly and headed to the auditorium to attend the Halloween dinner. At this time, the auditorium was decorated with a dazzling array of Halloween decorations. On the ceiling above the auditorium was a magical starry sky with thousands of bats flying in the air, adding to the Halloween atmosphere. As for the food, it was of course very rich, with delicacies exuding tempting aromas, filling the 4 long tables and the teachers' dining tables. After watching this grand and lively scene, Qin Yu suddenly sighed after a while. "What's wrong, Qin?" Elvis noticed Qin Yu sigh quite keenly. "I was thinking it would be nice if I could take a photo and post it on Moments," Qin Yu said with a shrug. "Imagine that after you post a message on Moments, the background prompts, you have received a comment from your friend Hermione and a like from Professor Dumbledore. Well, this is quite interesting. Circle of friends? What kind of circle is that?" The person who asked this question was George sitting next to him, and Fred also cast a curious look. "It's just, well, how should I put it?" Qin Yu paused, thinking about how to describe it. After all, these little wizards have limited understanding of things in the Muggle world. not to mention it's still a future thing. Advertisement then, he saw a copy of the Daily Prophet that Percy was looking through, and his eyes lit up, and he explained to the group of curious children. The circle of friends is equivalent to making your own copy of the Daily Prophet, and then post pictures and text on it, such as today's Halloween dinner, and your friends can see this newspaper through, Flu Network, and they can also leave you comments and messages. The Flu Network is one of the most important transmission channels in the wizarding world. The fireplaces in many wizard homes are connected to the Flu Network. When using it, sprinkle a spoonful of Flu powder worth 2 sickles and call out where you want to go. After a puff of green smoke passes, it can be transported to the destination. Moreover, Flu Network can also realize local transmission of the body. For example, you can transmit a face to another fireplace so that you can talk to the person opposite. Of course, this operation has certain risks, and it is also easy. Scaring others is something that very few people do. Qin Yu used an analogy to explain the Daily Prophet and the Flu Network, two things that George and Fred were familiar with, which gave them a rough idea, although they still had some difficulty understanding. Moreover, George and Fred were keenly aware that there was something going on here. So, they pestered Qin Yu and asked him to elaborate. Qin Yu couldn't resist the twins who were thirsty for knowledge, so he had to explain what he knew about the circle of friends in his previous life, combined with the situation in the magical world. This made the Weasley brothers' eyes brighter and brighter. In fact, Qin Yu had occasionally mentioned similar topics before, but didn't go into much detail. Now that Qin Yu introduced them, the two brothers seemed to have opened a new door. The magical world will change because of this, George said excitedly. And we will be the ones to change the entire magical world. Fred's voice was trembling. Ahem, I appreciate your enthusiasm, Qin Yu said with a slight cough. What else could he say besides encouragement? When the two brothers heard this, they immediately felt full of energy and started discussing together. One result of this incident is that Percy Weasley, the third brother of George and Fred, who originally aspired to enter the powerful department of the Ministry of Magic, was persuaded, by his two younger brothers to go to the magic department. Of course, this will have to wait until Percy graduates, and he is only a fourth-year student at this time, and has not even become a prefect. After Halloween, the weather became very cold. The distant mountains around Hogwarts were covered with a layer of ice and snow, and the Black Lake was also covered with cold and hard ice. Qin Yu finally mastered the use of the incantations in the pyramid under the patient guidance of the two professors. He knew that these incantations were similar to a language and could achieve various effects through different arrangements and combinations. In order to reward Qin Yu for his learning achievements, Professor Swinton gave him a piece of alchemy material. This is what's left over from the large pyramid they made. It's about 1/3 of the original size, which is quite a lot, because the materials used to make the pyramid are pressed very thin, so it's saved. When Qin Yu received this piece of alchemy material, he was really overjoyed. This thing is worth a lot of money, and you may not be able to buy it with money on the market, because according to Professor Swinton, this quality of alchemy, even he can only refine a little more of the materials, because there are not many catalysts sent by His Excellency Nico Flamel. With the alchemy materials and spells, Qin Yu naturally wanted to tinker with something, but it was definitely not a refrigerator. So, he set his sights on the flying sword he had always wanted. Of course, this was difficult. Apart from beating the alchemy materials into a 1-meter-long sword, he didn't have much breakthrough. This sword could neither fly nor have much power. It was not even as good as Quidditch. The golfer's bat works well. And he doesn't have much energy to study this recently, because the first official Quidditch match in his life is about to begin. Chapter 45. November 9th, Saturday. Early in the morning, Professor Dumbledore received a letter from the Ministry of Magic, or from the Wizengamot to be precise, informing him to go to London to attend an emergency meeting. In fact, many wizards are confused about the status of Wizengamot to the Ministry of Magic. It is nominally the Department of Magical Law Enforcement under the Ministry of Magic, and under this department there are famous agencies such as the Or Office and the Office for the Prohibition of the Misuse of Muggle Items. George and Fred's father, Arthur Weasley, is the director of the Office for the Prohibition of the Misuse of Muggle Articles. However, seemingly on the same level as several other organizations, the Wizengamot is very special because its members all have well-established backgrounds. The chief magician is Dumbledore, the number one person in the wizarding world, and the other members are also different. Simple, including the Minister of Magic, deputy ministers, and senior officials of various departments, as well as some famous wizards in the magic world. It can be said to be a strong lineup, and its function is to conduct trials, discussions, and votes on major events from time to time. The most important thing is that the Wisengamot was established long before the Ministry of Magic and was the authority of the wizarding world long ago. Therefore, the Wisengamot is a very transcendent and special existence in the entire Ministry of Magic. Now, the sudden receipt of a letter from here proves that something important must have happened at the Ministry of Magic, and Professor Dumbledore certainly does not dare to neglect it. So, he gave the task of giving the opening speech of the Quidditch match to Professor McGonagall, the vice principal and head of Gryffindor College, and he rushed to the Whitehall Underground in central London as quickly as possible, that is, where the British Ministry of Magic is located. As for whether he entered through the toilet like ordinary employees of the Ministry of Magic, it was unknown to outsiders. Good morning, gentlemen and ladies. I declare that the first Quidditch house match of this academic year at Hogwarts has officially begun. Professor McGonagall put the wand gently against her throat and cast the loud voice charm to let his voice spread throughout the Quidditch pitch. As Professor McGonagall's brief opening remarks came to light, the stadium erupted in enthusiastic cheers. Now, please invite the players from both sides of the Gryffindor and Slytherin match, as well as the referee Ms. Hooch. Professor McGonagall said again. Then, a total of 15 players, including players from both sides and the referee, entered the center of the court one after another with broomsticks in hand. Professor McGonagall, on the other hand, also returned to his seat. Mrs. Hooch blew the silver whistle, and the game officially began. 14 players from Gryffindor and Slytherin quickly rose into the sky on broomsticks, a huge quaffle, 2 smaller black bludgers, and a golden ball with wings. Released by Mrs. Hooch. Come on, Gryffindor. We must win, Slytherin. Students from both colleges cheer for their teams. Hello, everyone. I am Linda Zhu from the 5th grade of Hufflepuff, and I will be today's #1 commentator. I hope everyone likes me. A beautiful girl with long burgundy hair was on the commentator's desk, said with a smile. Hello, everyone. I am Mani Wanda from the 3rd grade of Ravenclaw, and I will be today's #2 commentator. Another cool-looking girl with short chestnut hair said cheerfully. The venue for Quidditch matches is too big, and players are flying around. No matter how high they sit, it is difficult for the audience to see all the details of the game. Therefore, commentators are very necessary, because the commentator's desk has the best field of vision, and with the assistance of magic props, you can see clearly many places that are difficult for others to see. Now, the game has just started. We see that the players on both sides are not competing too fiercely. Currently, the quaffle is in the hands of Slytherin's chaser Adrian Poos. Adrian Poos already has several games of experience, and he joined Slytherin's Quidditch team last year. Linda Zhu said. That's right, in the last game against our Ravenclaws, Pusey scored a very beautiful goal, and our team's goalkeeper seemed to be asleep. Mani Wanda said with a bit of resentment. After hearing her words, many people on the court couldn't help laughing, while the Ravenclaw students looked at the short-haired girl on the commentary desk with some annoyance. However, this is indeed a fact. Ravenclaw's Quidditch team has been in decline in the past 2 years. The level of the players cannot be compared with Gryffindor and Slytherin. They can only be abused on the court. However, this guy named Mani Wanda is too hateful. How can he talk about his college team like that? Mani, you can't say that. Ravenclaw's performance in the last game was remarkable. Linda Zhu smoothed things over, and then changed the subject with considerable experience. So, let's turn our attention back to the court again. Now Pusey has taken the ball and flew to Gryffindor's goalpost. Mani, do you think he can score? When Mani heard this, she immediately shook her head and said, It's difficult. Oliver Wood, the vice-captain of Gryffindor, is a very experienced goalkeeper. He is doing the classic double figure 8 fly at this time. Against 3, the goalposts were guarded tightly. You can see that Pusey was already hesitating about which goalpost to throw the ball to. Wait, that's Angelina Johnson of Gryffindor? What is she going to do? Angelina rushed. Go over. She grabbed the quaffle. Oh my God. This little girl who has just passed the team selection for more than a month actually snatched the quaffle from Poos's hand. Just when Poos was hesitating, Angelina rushed over and snatched away the quaffle. Seeing this scene, Mani Wanda, who was originally giving a serious explanation, instantly became excited. The Gryffindor stands also cheered. She's great, Linda said. No, she is brave. A little girl who just joined the team dares to steal the ball from an old player. How much courage does it take? Mani said with some admiration. Yes. Quidditch is a sport that requires courage. Linda nodded and continued. Compared to Angelina's courage, the male players on the field don't seem to be very active. Look at our Captain Charlie Weasley. He is still slowly looking for traces of the golden snitch in the sky. Well, Monty, it's not good for you to say that about Captain Weasley. After all, the golden snitch is not easy to find. Advertisement, hey, it doesn't matter. Charlie and I are distant cousins. As far as I know, he has a very good temper. He doesn't have a girlfriend yet. If I have a chance, I can help you arrange a date. Monty. Professor McGonagall, who was sitting not far away, couldn't help but said in a deep voice when he heard that the child's topic had gone off topic. I'm sorry, Professor McGonagall. Monty stuck out her tongue and said. After Angelina grabbed the ball, she flew towards Slytherin's goalpost. However, Slytherin's 3 chasers followed closely and rushed over. Ah, Angelina is in danger, Linda said worriedly. Angelina needs help. It's hard for her to break through Slytherin's 3-man attack. No, Slytherin's batter is getting closer. Before Monty finished her words, a sturdy batsman from Slytherin had already approached and swung his bat, hitting a nearby bludger hard. The bludger screamed and rushed towards Angelina Johnson, who was being chased and blocked. At this moment, a figure stabbed over, blocking Angelina's side, and swung the bat, knocking the bludger away with a bang. When Monty saw it, she immediately shouted, "It's Gryffindor's batter, George Weasley." He saved Angelina, who was almost hit by a bludger at the critical moment. That's great. But, Monty, how did you recognize that he is George Weasley? He looks very much like his twin brother, and they are both Gryffindor's beaters. It's very simple. George's nose is slightly higher than Fred's, and his eyes are larger and smaller. It's easy to tell. This is a secret I discovered when I stayed at the Weasleys for a summer last year. You may wonder, but I must say, my eyes are like microscopes, and I can tell at a glance that he is George. Monty said quite proudly there. Professor McGonagall sighed, not knowing whether to stop the conversation between the two of them. George, who was flying in the sky, looked at the commentary table with a headache. He couldn't help it. He really couldn't afford to offend this distant cousin. Last summer, he had caused a lot of trouble to their family, including him and Fred, and Ron had even cast a shadow on this cousin. Angelina's side went straight with the ball. However, after throwing the ball, the quaffle was blocked by Slytherin's goalkeeper. The Slytherin students in the stands cheered, while the Gryffindor students made sounds of regret. It's okay. Pay attention to defense, George. Qin Yu flew past George and comforted him. George nodded, and then whispered, Qin, let's use that one. At this time, the person who got the quaffle was Slytherin's Marcus Flint. This guy was tall and fierce. Okay, I'll stay over there first, and you wait for my signal. After Qin Yu finished speaking, he quickly flew somewhere ahead. Under the protection of 2 other chasers, Marcus attacked Gryffindor's goalpost in the shape of an arrow. After the explanation of Monty Wanda, a senior Quidditch fan and number 2 commentator, many students who don't know the rules know that this is the very troublesome eagle-head offensive formation. Over there in the Gryffindor stands. I borrowed it. Please let me come over. Hagrid's huge body squeezed through the crowd. Hagrid, we're here. Elvis saw Hagrid and called him over. After the candy party that day, several roommates in Qin Yu's dormitory had already gotten to know Hagrid, so they were very enthusiastic to see him come over. Hagrid, why did you come now? Jimmy asked curiously. There was some delay in the Forbidden Forest this morning, Hagrid answered. Did something happen to the unicorn? Wilson asked worriedly. Oh no, it's the centaurs. Something happened. I went over to inquire, but they drove me back, Hagrid said helplessly. After saying this, Hagrid muttered, I actually don't want to interfere with their affairs. Their tempers are not generally bad. Then ignore them. Let's watch the game. Hagrid, please help us hold the banner. Elvis said. Okay. Hagrid nodded happily. Then, he took a banner from Elvis and held it high above his head. Chapter 46. Qin Yu held the wooden handle of the broomstick with both hands and controlled the broom to fly to his predetermined position. It was located diagonally in front of the Gryffindor goalpost, not far from goalkeeper Oliver Wood. Qin Yu could even clearly see the frown on Wood's solemn face. There is no way. The situation on the court is very unfavorable for Gryffindor, because the one who has the ball now is Slytherin's Marcus Flint, and this kid is not a good guy. Marcus, with the cooperation of the 2 Slytherin chasers, rushed towards Gryffindor, and let's look at Gryffindor's response. The 2 chasers attacked from both sides, intending to interfere with Marcus' side. Angelina came over. She swooped down from the sky and went straight to Marcus. Gryffindor used the park and clamp tactics was used to force an attack. Oops. What a pity. Angelina Johnson was severely knocked away by Marcus, and the attack tactic failed. Monty Wanda was on stage. Explained. Monty, is this a foul? Linda Zhu asked curiously. It can be seen from the fact that Mrs. Hooch did not determine that he violated the rules, and his behavior should be regarded as a normal defensive collision. Monet explained. I see. The current situation is not good for Gryffindor, Linda said worriedly. At this time, Angelina, who was hit by Marcus, struggled to control the broomstick. However, she still staggered and fell down. Fortunately, Captain Charlie Weasley, who still hadn't found the golden snitch, swooped over in time and helped her stabilize her fall. Qin Yu, looking at the situation on the field, had no intention of going over to help, even though the short-haired girl on the commentary desk had already started to say in a sarcastic tone, the two Gryffindor batters seemed to be watching from the sky. Landscape, he remained unmoved, suspended there. And Gryffindor's other batter, George Weasley, although moving, did not fly in the direction of Marcus, but flew diagonally to the latter's side. George's move made the two Slytherin batters who were a little wary of him feel confused. However, they immediately showed contemptuous smiles, probably thinking that this kid had given up resistance, because Gryffindor was so worried. At that time, no one could stop Marcus Flint from charging wildly. The fact was just as they expected. Marcus once again knocked away a Gryffindor chaser who was trying to intercept him, approaching the Gryffindor goalpost. Why didn't goalkeeper Oliver Wood continue with the previous double figure-8 fly? Linda Zhu asked doubtfully. Because Marcus is not the former Darian Pusey. He is too strong. The double figure-8 flying will not only fail to achieve the purpose of comprehensive defense, but will consume the goalkeeper's energy and easily allow Marcus to take advantage of the loophole. Therefore, Gryffindor's goalkeeper, Senior Wood, chose to only guard the middle goal and be ready to pounce at any time. Monty explained clearly. Then Gryffindor is really in danger now, Linda said with a sigh. Well, I'm afraid Senior Wood won't be able to hold on, Monty also said. Listening to the explanations of the two wizard ladies on the commentary stage, the audience in the stands also deeply felt the crisis and subtlety of the situation on the field. Seeing Marcus dribbling the ball quickly toward the goalpost, the Gryffindor students were naturally nervous for goalkeeper Wood, while everyone on the Slytherin side was excited. First-year students like Jerome the freshman all started cheering loudly. Marcus dribbled the ball forward, but Gryffindor's chaser was blocked behind. Captain Charlie Weasley couldn't catch up with Marcus after rescuing Angelina, and he had to be wary of Slater at all times. Lynn Seeker. Oh, I'm afraid this ball is going to be lost. Professor Swinton's voice rang in Snape's ears. Question mark. Snape frowned and looked at this guy who appeared out of nowhere. I just tested a new alchemy formula and lost track of time. As you know, those spells have very strict requirements on the carrier. Swinton shrugged and explained casually, and then he turned his gaze to the sky above the court and asked, how did Qin perform in his first official game? Did I miss anything? No. He has been looking at the scenery in the sky. Professor Snape quoted the short-haired girl in a cold tone. Of course, he definitely didn't think that Qin was really just looking at the scenery, and he was even vaguely looking forward to the boy's next performance. After all, they had known each other for a long time. How could Snape not know that this boy was full of evil? Hey, look at the scenery. Swinton repeated the phrase with a playful tone. To make him believe that Qin is really so honest, it would be better to make him believe that Snape would put on women's clothes. Well, put makeup and powder on your face, and hold a folding fan in your hand to hide your shame. Thinking of this, Professor Swinton subconsciously looked at Snape next to him. As if he felt his gaze, the latter turned his head slightly and looked at him with narrowed eyes. His face was as dark as water, and his eyes showed murderous intent. Professor Swinton immediately put away his nonsensical thoughts, and his expression became serious. Well, after all, there is a spell in the magic world called legilimency, and another called Avada Kedavra. While the two professors were chatting, the situation on the field was also changing. Marcus is approaching the goalpost, ready to go. There is a high probability that this ball will go in. What is George doing? Why is he flying out? Go and stop Marcus. You are a coward. Sorry, Professor McGonagall, I will pay attention, Monty said a little excitedly, and finally was intimidated by Professor McGonagall's majesty and did not say any curse words. Monty, I think George may have some ideas of his own. Linda Zhu had a different opinion. How is that possible? What else can he do besides causing trouble? Monty said in a tone of, I know him too well. After Marcus approached the goalpost, he slowed down and stabilized his body. No one could stop him at this time. He even had time to look back at the weaklings of Gryffindor, and his face Kamaya showed a contemptuous and arrogant smile. Note: it is illegal to hold the ball into the ring, which means that the chaser cannot carry the ball through the hoop on the goalpost. So Marcus has to stop outside the goalpost to throw the ball. Goalkeeper would look solemn, as if facing a formidable enemy. And Marcus started to wander around to interfere with the flight, which made it difficult for Wood to determine which of the 3 goalpost hoops he was going to shoot. But Wood didn't wait too long. After lingering for a while, Marcus suddenly rushed to the left, and then stopped suddenly, getting ready to throw. Wood quickly leaned over and rushed to the goalpost to protect it, but the response was obviously a bit hasty, and there was no time to block the quaffle that Marcus was about to throw. George! At this moment, a loud roar sounded in the air. Immediately afterwards, with a bang sound, a black bludger was hit hard by George and flew straight in a certain direction. And that direction was not Marcus, who was being protected by the Slytherin players, but Qin Yu, who was parked diagonally in front of the goal post. How did he? Linda couldn't help but exclaimed in confusion. Many people at the scene were similar to her, and they all didn't understand what the red-haired Gryffindor batter was doing. Could it be that he felt that he was about to lose points and there was internal strife? After all, the batsman named Qin was watching slowly the whole time, making no effort at all, which made people angry. However, some people who knew about the Quidditch game or had watched Qin Yu's selection showed some doubts, and Professor McGonagall couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Professor Snape also hummed softly, but it was hard to tell what the emotion was. Everyone had various reactions, but it only happened in a moment, because the bludger became very fast after George's hard hit, and the ear-piercing whistle spread across the stadium, dozens of meters away, and suddenly too, "We will hit the target soon." But the batter named Qin, who was the target of the bludger, stayed there without leaving or dodging. He looked calmly at the rapidly approaching bludger. Immediately, everyone saw him raise the bat in his hand high, and then swung it out suddenly, hitting the roaring bludger with great force. Bang! The dull and loud hitting sound reached everyone's ears after a moment of delay after the bat hit the bludger. Advertisement: it can be seen that the speed of the blow just now has reached a very fast level. In the shock and emotion of many people, the speeding bludger suddenly changed its direction after encountering a heavy hit from the batter Qin, and formed an obtuse angle of nearly 135 degrees with its previous flight path. Continue to push forward decisively. After the second heavy blow, the speed of the bludger nearly doubled again, and this time the direction of its impact was pointed directly at Marcus Flint. Gryffindor's purpose is finally revealed and clearly revealed. However, the Slytherin players, who had been wary of others and ignored Qin Yu, the batter, had no time to stop them and could only watch the extremely fast bludger flying towards Marcus. Marcus, on his side, had already adjusted his body shape, holding the quaffle in one hand and raising it high, as if to throw it. Unexpectedly, at this moment, there was a scream of wind in his ears, and then he felt as if his waist was hit hard by a powerful cannonball, and his bones were about to be broken. Marcus cried out in pain and turned his body sideways. The quaffle also got rid of it. Slytherin chaser Marcus was hit by a bludger and crashed into the goalpost. Wow! The whole place made a noise. Merlin's beard. Double combo. What on earth did I just see? Qin, with the cooperation of George, actually hit a twisting double combo. He is really amazing. I can see such excitement in the Quidditch game at Hogwarts. It's so exciting. It's incredible. Senior Wood was also good. He caught the quaffle dropped by Marcus and held it tightly. After he grabbed the ball, he showed Qin a bright smile, which contained 3 points of doting and 7 points of appreciation. It is really so loving. Fan and number 2 commentator Moni Wanda was so excited that she was a little incoherent. Moni, watch your words. Professor McGonagall warned again. Originally, the tacit understanding between them must have been cultivated through long-term training. This kind of relationship is really enviable. Meng and I changed her way of expression, although it's still a little weird. However, the audience at the scene had already been moved by her previous words. Qin, 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 Wood, Wood, Wood. Of course, there are also many voices shouting Weasley. The 3 of them are the heroes of this blockade and deserve such cheers and praise. Qin Yu and George's tactics were successful, and they flew back and forth in the sky excitedly. I just intercepted a goal. I'm too complacent now, Professor Snape said coldly. As the Dean of Slytherin House, Professor Snape naturally has no shame. Oh, really? Do you really think this is just a simple interception? Professor Swinton, sitting aside, said with a half-smile. "You can shut up?" Professor Snape said slightly irritably. Yes, of course he knew that this was more than just a simple interception. Gryffindor's long-planned sniper not only prevented Marcus from scoring a goal, but also caused him to suffer a certain amount of damage. The injury will definitely affect today's game. The most important thing is that Qin Yu's attack, just now the attack directly destroyed the confidence and courage of the Slytherin Quidditch team. The general is frustrated, and the morale of the army is greatly lost. How can we still win this game? In fact, in the next game, as Professor Snape and many others expected, the Slytherin Quidditch team played without any impetus and tended to be conservative, even if they forced Marcus to stay on the field. Flint kept yelling, but it still couldn't boost their team's confidence. Moreover, the batsman named Qin seemed to be a different person from the beginning, waving his bat on the court and killing everyone, which has simply become a psychological shadow for the Slytherin players. Even the Seeker, who had little offensive power, was beaten several times by him. Just because the Seeker used the Pokafleur technique, Charlie almost fell to the ground and chewed the mud. Qin Yu was very unhappy with him, chasing him in the sky for half the stadium. Qin hit Marcus again. We see that Marcus is a little embarrassed now, but Marcus is still tenacious. Qin's mobility and accuracy are fully demonstrated again. Come, let us listen to the cheers on the field. What are they shouting? After Wanda said this, she put her hands to her ears as if listening. Qin is the king. Qin is the king. Qin is the king. The sound first rang from the Gryffindor stands, and then spread to almost the entire Quidditch pitch, except of course the Slytherin students. These are the words on the banner held by Hagrid. They were words written by Elvis when Qin Yu participated in the selection. Now, more people have finally shouted it out. They are shouting, "Qin is the king." Linda Zhu was also infected by the atmosphere at the scene and said excitedly, "Yes, Qin is the king on the Quidditch field at this moment. Qin is our king." Monty's last words came out from her chest. "Qin is our king. Qin is our king." Such cheers also sounded in the stands. Feeling the sound like the roaring mountains and tsunami below, Qin Yu was somewhat excited in his heart. He didn't want to falsely say that he didn't care about this. On the contrary, he felt that living freely and freely was one of the purposes of his new life. He enjoyed the hustle and bustle of the moment. "My king." George flew over at some point, put his right hand on his left chest, and saluted in a serious manner. Qin Yu couldn't help but rolled his eyes, and then said angrily, "Okay, let's work harder and try to widen the score gap, so that Charlie doesn't have to work." Well, as long as the score gap is increased to more than 150 points, does the Seeker still need the 150 points for catching the golden snitch? Hey, if Charlie heard what you said, he would be so angry. George felt that Qin Yu's words were too damaging. I think he should be happy. After Qin Yu said this, he lowered his body and rushed out suddenly. George also roared and flew after him. Dimensional wall. I have been stuck on this plot for 2 days. I checked the original work and some information, thought about tactics and so on, and wanted to write it as closely as possible. However, due to my limited ability, I could only write it as it is now. I know that writing about Quidditch is a bit thankless, but this is Quidditch. How could there be no Quidditch in the Harry Potter world? Finally, thank you again for your continued support. Take a bow. Chapter 47. Deep in the Forbidden Forest, there is a mysterious and simple settlement. The noise of the Quidditch stadium in the distance reached here, and the sound had become a little faint. Of course, the slogans shouted by those people could still be faintly heard. However, the slogan made people a little confused and didn't know what it meant. At the edge of this settlement, a man with a human body from the waist up and a horse body from the waist down, or a creature, was standing there looking at the direction from which the noise was coming. He has long golden white hair, sapphire-like eyes, a very handsome face, and the horse body underneath him has a soft silver-white mane. Whether it's a human body or a horse body, he has tight muscles, and his lines are rough and full of wild beauty. This is a horseman, a very handsome horseman. Ta-da-da. The gentle sound of horse hooves came from far to near. An older centaur with long red hair and beard, and a brown-red horse body, slowly approached. Fire ends, human excitement does not belong to us. You have also seen how dangerous that person is today. If we have too much contact with humans, it may bring us disaster. The older red-haired centaur said slowly in a low tone. Yes, this morning, probably before the start of the Quidditch match at Hogwarts, a man in a black cloak suddenly appeared in their settlement of centaurs deep in the Forbidden Forest. After the man arrived, He directly asked them about something that happened many years ago. After being refused by a centaur, the man angrily cast a spell and knocked him to the ground. Then, the centaurs raised their bows and arrows and attacked him collectively, but the man easily defused them all, and finally pressed the tip of the wand hard against Firenze's neck. Their companions were threatened, so they could only tell the man what happened back then, of course, only the part they knew. Ronan, is what happened about my father true? Why did he leave with those people back then? The young centaur named Firenze turned his head and asked with a frown. His sapphire eyes were full of confusion and confusion. When he turned his head, he saw a bruise on his neck, which was left by the man before with his wand. Even though the centaurs were good at magical treatment, the bruise was still difficult to remove in a short time. I don't know why your father Asta left. I was still young and ignorant. I only know that Asta is the most talented fortune teller in our tribe. He can see destiny through the stars. The trajectory. Later, a group of people from the tribe came to take him away. When he left, he said that fate had arranged for him to do a great thing and he must do it. However, what happened later you also know that he failed to come back. The older centaur, Ronan, continued to say in a low tone. So, did he change his destiny or become a part of his destiny? Firenze continued to ask. No one can know this. We can only know that the horse people need to stand outside the destiny, rather than participate in it. Ronan said earnestly. Ronan, you can't explain to this kid. He will only understand these truths after suffering. Obviously, he didn't suffer enough today. An angry voice sounded. Then came the intensive sound of horse hooves. Soon, the owner of the voice appeared in front of two centaurs, a centaur with black hair and a black mane. The black centaur was a little embarrassed at this time. After magic treatment, there were still obvious injuries on his face and body. Bane, I will find out what happened back then, instead of sitting here waiting for fate to come. Firenze looked at this grumpy guy not to be outdone. I think you just want to leave. You probably want to be a mule for those people to ride on. Bane said angrily. You are the mule. Firenze glared. Okay, Bane, Firenze. You are not enemies. Ronan stepped between the two of them and tried to persuade them. Then, the two tit-for-tat centaurs snorted and turned their heads. The black centaur left angrily, but the young centaur still cast his gaze on the noisy Quidditch stadium, not knowing whether he was imagining the scene of the game or the human world. The first inter-house Quidditch match at Hogwarts this school year finally came to an end the moment Charlie grabbed the golden snitch. Before he grabbed the golden ball, Gryffindor was already 90 points ahead of Slytherin. Although it did not reach the 150 points expected by the two batters Qin Yu and George, it was enough to crush Slytherin. Litlin. The winner is elated. The loser is disgraced. Advertisement Professor McGonagall once again stood in front of the stage and announced the successful conclusion of the competition with a loud voice and said that this was a game full of competitive spirit. After that, the teachers and students began to leave one after another. Of course, they were still discussing the game just now, talking about which scene was the most unforgettable, Qin's twisting double combo or his pursuit of Slytherin. Players were running all over the court, so much so that when the golden snitch finally appeared, the seeker didn't dare to try too hard to grab it. In short, this game has spread Qin's name to the ears of everyone present, and this game will eventually remain deeply in the memories of many people. Monty. Well, cousin, thank you so much today. At a certain exit of the stands, Fred waited for Monty Wanda who had just come out. Monty Wanda smiled and said, Hey, it's a trivial matter. However, I am very curious. Qin and the Gryffindor Quidditch team are so powerful. Is it necessary for me to cooperate? The two of them walked aside as they talked, avoiding the crowd. Of course it is necessary. Qin often said that even if a lion hunts a little white rabbit, it will use all its strength. What's more, the Slytherin Quidditch team is not a well-behaved rabbit, Fred said to Monty said, and quoted what Qin Yu said. Why do you want to kill the little white rabbit? You are so cruel. Ming and I frowned and looked distressed. Cousin, please stop pretending to be a lady in front of me. Fred heard this and a black line appeared on his forehead. This master who dared to throw Ron's pet Scabbers into the fish tank. How could he be a delicate little girl? Of course, Fred also knew that Monty was not a person who liked to cruelly torture animals. As for her attitude towards Scabbers, according to her, she felt disgusted as soon as she saw the mouse and wanted to teach her a lesson. It made the Weasley family confused. Haha, although what Qin said is a bit weird, I agree with the truth. So, I also played a role in Gryffindor winning this game, and I am also a part of your plan, right? Mengni said with a smile, a bit cunning in her smile. Of course, you are our best friend on the Gryffindor Quidditch team, Fred also said with a smile. Yes, Monty deliberately ridiculed, sarcastically, and even ridiculed the Gryffindor Quidditch team before. Qin Yu asked her to do it in advance. The purpose was very simple, which was to make the Slytherin team feel like underestimating the enemy. In this case, it would be equal. When Landfinder finds an opportunity, he can give them a hard blow. Facts have proved that this strategy is very effective, even far beyond expectations. Of course, this is also inseparable from the hard training of Qin Yu, George, and Fred. Don't look at the folding double combo, which only makes the bludger bend at an obtuse angle, but this requires the second hitter to be very strong. In order to practice this move, Qin Yu was smashed into a pig's head by the bludger for several days. Fortunately, hard work always pays off, which made him and the Gryffindor Quidditch team pretend to be X. What, do you regret letting George go to play but you didn't? Monty asked in a leisurely tone. No way, I admit defeat. I didn't let him go on purpose, Fred said with a raised eyebrow. By the way, the cooperation between Fred and Qin Yu is not inferior to George at all. After all he has to do is hit the bludger hard in the direction of Qin Yu, and Qin Yu will automatically take the initiative to hit it a second time. However, a Quidditch team can only have 2 batters on the field, and the Weasley twins faced the decision to separate for the first time. So, the 2 of them came up with a good idea to determine the outcome through competition. The content of the competition is to eat BB multi-flavor beans. This is a candy with random flavors, including bitter, spicy, sour, and sweet. At that time, in the open space in front of Hagrid's hut, 100 BB multi-flavor beans were placed in front of each of them to see who could eat more without vomiting. Then, when Fred got to the 56th pill and tasted the legendary Houtuinia chordata, he immediately lost his defense, painfully announced that he would give up the game, and vomited the thing out. George didn't know what the food tasted like at the time, but after Fred announced his abstention, he also started vomiting. In short, only the 2 of them could imagine such a ridiculous competition. Afterwards, Fred happily gave up the batter's position and let George play. Monty, we will have a celebration party later, at the Hagrid cabin. You must come, Fred invited. Okay, Fred. I'll go back and change clothes and then go over there, Monty replied. Then, the 2 parted ways, with Monty returning to Ravenclaw's dormitory area, while Fred went to join Qin Yu and the others. The originally bustling Quidditch pitch returned to silence after the teachers and students left one after another. Only a few resident birds that had not flown far away for the winter landed on the grass below the pitch, rummaging for grass seeds. Yes, both noise and silence can be accommodated here. Dimensional wall. Note: centaurs do not use magic wands, but are good at magic healing, divination and astronomy, stargazing. The main weapons they use are bows and arrows. Then, resident birds are birds that do not migrate with the seasons, which is the opposite of migratory birds. Explain it carefully, it's definitely not the word. Count. Chapter 48. Hagrid's hut has become a frequent gathering place for Qin Yu and his friends. It is close to the Forbidden Forest, overlooking the mountains, with fresh air and a wide view. You can occasionally see the magical animals fed by Hagrid, but they rarely appear, of course, except for the unicorn mother and daughter, who will come here to eat from time to time. Clean the carrots and leave gracefully after eating. If you are really bored, you can go to the Whomping Willow next to it and compete with the willow tree. According to George and Fred, the Whomping Willow has a very bad temper. When he hits people, he really hits them and it really hurts. Of course, no one has taken the initiative to try it except the 2 of them. In short, everyone still likes it here very much, as long as Hagrid doesn't bring out the cookies he baked or the dark sour soup porridge. Today, the Quidditch match was won, and the entire team came over, including Monty Wanda, who changed into casual clothes. Hogwarts students are allowed to dress casually when they are not in class or on non-important occasions. However, many people are too lazy to change and just keep wearing wizard robes. As for the food, Hagrid bought it in Hogsmeade Village with the gold galleons given by Qin Yu. Since the Acromantula Venom opened the market, they have made a small profit. Qin Yu is confident enough to leave enough money to buy books, school supplies, and a broomstick for Hermione. The rest can be used as he likes. Splurge, of course. So far, there is not much to spend money on. The biggest expense is to go to Hogsmeade Village to buy some food and drinks. While Qin Yu and his friends were eating and drinking in the Hagrid cabin, the principal of Hogwarts, Dumbledore, who had left for most of the day, returned to the school. Professor McGonagall, who was wearing an emerald green robe, also walked into the circular principal's office not long after. After arriving, Professor McGonagall briefly explained the results of today's Quidditch match to Dumbledore. Then, she couldn't help but ask, Albus, what happened this time that they were so anxious to let you go? After hearing this, Dumbledore was silent for a moment, and then said slowly, a messenger came from Brazil. He claimed that the Oris of the Brazilian Ministry of Magic had discovered some people, and those people have now become a serious problem there and are spreading. Trend, and what they're promoting is a bit like an old friend of mine. An old friend of yours? Who? Professor McGonagall frowned. There were many powerful people among Dumbledore's old friends, and quite a few of them had caused a lot of trouble. Fortunately, with Dumbledore here, his friends naturally did not end well. So, if you are friends with Dumbledore, you still have to be more cautious in your behavior. If one day you go astray, Old Dang will take action personally, regardless of whether you are close or distant. Gellert Grindelwald. Professor Dumbledore said this name that he had not mentioned for more than 40 years. Grindelwald? A look of surprise appeared on Professor McGonagall's usually calm face. She continued in a daze. Hasn't he been captured and imprisoned in Nurmengard? Nurmengard is a prison as famous as Azkaban in the wizarding world, where wizards who have committed serious crimes are imprisoned. In the legendary Wizard Showdown in 1945, Grindelwald, considered one of the most powerful dark wizards in the history of the wizarding world, was defeated by Dumbledore, and he was imprisoned in Nurmengard. In Germany's cell. Advertisement. This has been a long time ago. If Dumbledore hadn't mentioned it, Professor McGonagall would have almost forgotten about this person. After all, monsters have appeared throughout the ages, and after Grindelwald, another Dark Lord appeared who was even worse than him, turning the wizarding world upside down and becoming a new taboo in the wizarding world, and the story of Grindelwald also covered by him. Of course, people who have experienced Grindelwald's rampant and active years will definitely not really forget him, because Grindelwald once brought a crazy dark moment to the wizarding world. Grindelwald is indeed still being imprisoned, and Nurmengard is heavily guarded. It is unlikely that he will escape. I just came back from him, and he told me personally that people outside it was not his arrangement, but he expected someone to inherit his will. Although he regretted his past crimes, he still felt that some of his ideas were right. Dumbledore, after saying that, he sighed softly. The so-called Grindelwald's will means that wizards are supreme. Wizards should be the masters of the world, rather than sneaking around in corners. The way to realize his idea is to unify the magical world and then trample Muggles hard, underfoot. You mean, someone is using his name to develop power? Professor McGonagall said solemnly. I'm afraid that's the case. You also know that his ideas are very popular among many wizards, even far more than Voldemort, alas. After so many years, everyone still uses that person, you know who, called Voldemort, Dumbledore said worriedly. That person is Voldemort's nickname. People have always felt that calling him by his first name is a taboo. The 10-year period is coming soon, and Dumbledore has a premonition that this guy may return again. One Voldemort was enough to cause a headache, and now there was a group of fanatics who advocated the supremacy of wizards. Dumbledore found that he seemed to be a little powerless. Thinking of this, he glanced at the quiet phoenix fox in the room, and a trace of loneliness flashed in his eyes. No matter how powerful a person is, he cannot withstand the erosion of time. Although this emotion passed by in a flash, it was still keenly captured by Professor McGonagall. She said in a calm tone, Albus, you don't have to be too pessimistic. I believe that the future of the wizarding world is bright, because there are many outstanding and lovely young people who uphold the concept of justice. Even if we cannot do things, they will eventually be done. Young people. As Professor Dumbledore murmured these words, complex emotions appeared in his eyes. These emotions included sadness, anger, self-blame, regret, and anxiety. However, these emotions did not last long. They just appeared. It was deeply hidden by him and replaced by determination, calmness, and perseverance. Minerva, you are right. The future of the wizarding world must be bright. I will do what I can for those young people. After Dumbledore said this, he seemed to be addressing Professor McGonagall, and as if muttering to himself, it seems that some adjustments need to be made to those previous expectations. Your Excellency Dumbledore, I am willing to obey your orders. Professor McGonagall said with a smile. Thank you, Minerva, Dumbledore replied. Dimensional Wall. Regarding Grindelwald's changes in his later years, let's just follow this book. Don't get too entangled. After all, movies and novels are both shot in two ways. Then, I know everyone is anxious, and I am anxious too. Chapter 49. Qin, you really should experience Christmas at Hogwarts. At the banquet that day, There will be 100 plump roast turkeys, mountains of roasted meats and boiled potatoes, and delicious food. Small sausages, fragrant meat stew, and various fruits. Hagrid tried to impress Qin Yu with delicious food so that he could stay for Christmas. Mainly, after spending half a year together, Qin Yu suddenly had to leave for more than 10 days, and Hagrid was somewhat uncomfortable with it. It was already approaching Christmas, and Hogwarts would be on vacation soon, and they were also preparing for holiday celebrations. After all, many children chose to stay in school and registered with Professor McGonagall. Hagrid and Qin Yu are currently selecting suitable furs to make Christmas trees at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Just this one, go straight. Qin Yu pointed to a straight and big fir tree and said, then turned to answer Hagrid's words, I am also looking forward to spending Christmas at Hogwarts, but I promised Hermione that I would go home and spend Christmas with her, and I do miss her a little, and Uncle David and Aunt Jenny. Well, I don't mean to stop you. I just want to tell you what Christmas at Hogwarts is like. You know, children like those very much. Hagrid shrugged and explained casually. Haha, wait until next year or the year after that. I will experience the school Christmas again. After all, I will stay here for 7 years. There will always be a chance. Qin Yu said with a smile. Yeah, you're right, it's still a long time. After hearing this, Hagrid felt that what Qin Yu said made sense, and he felt much better. Then, he carried his huge axe and came to the fir tree Qin Yu chose. After choosing a suitable angle, he swung the axe and chopped it down hard. He skillfully chopped in a circle around the trunk. When the last axe struck, there was a crunching sound from the bottom of the fir tree, and the straight tree gradually tilted and finally fell to the ground. After the fir tree was cut down, Hagrid put one end of the trunk on his shoulders and dragged it outward with all his strength. Qin Yu followed him and helped him pick up the axe. This is already the 12th tree cut down today. It is enough, so they will not come back again, and there is no need to leave their tools here. Hagrid dragged the fir tree, leaving a winding trail on the snow. Qin Yu followed this trail and followed him back to Hogwarts Castle. When Qin Yu and the others walked into the auditorium, George and Fred were helping the professors to move things with a grimace. The reason was that these two guys cast magic on Snowball, and the snowball lost control and was next to Professor Snape. After it exploded, they were lifted up and slipped over to help. Qin Yu's arrival cheered up the two of them, and they clamored to hang various decorations on the newly moved tree together. Soon, with the help of Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, Hagrid, and several students, the auditorium was decorated lively and full of festive atmosphere. Looking at the hanging flower ribbons all over the wall, all kinds of beautiful Christmas decorations, and the Christmas tree hanging with shiny icicles, hundreds of candles or golden bubbles, Qin Yu suddenly thought for some reason. The little girl with brown hair and beautiful eyes. Probably, the holidays are meant to be spent with the people you think are important. And when I first came to this world, the first person I saw was the most special existence after all. Returning to the Gryffindor dormitory from the auditorium, Qin Yu began to pack his luggage, bringing a few pieces of clothes for winter. Then, the rest of the suitcase was a gift for the Granger family, including Hermione. A large part of them were bought by Qin Yu occasionally or obtained through various channels. Over time, he accumulated a considerable amount. Looking at the packed suitcase, Qin Yu suddenly remembered Professor Swinton's bag that contained many owl models. If he had that thing, would he still have to worry about how to pack his luggage? Well, I will have to convince Professor Swinton to give it to me next year. Qin Yu thought firmly in his heart. 2 days before Christmas, Hogwarts officially goes on holiday. Students who stay in school can move freely around the school, play or study in various places such as dormitories, public rest areas, and campuses. Students leaving will take the Hogwarts Express at Hogsmeade Station to their destination. Qin Yu, on this very day, boarded the train with his suitcase. There were obviously far fewer people going home for Christmas than those returning to school when school started, and many compartments on the train were empty. Qin Yu picked an unoccupied box and walked in. However, even though there were not many people, he did not immediately enjoy the quiet treatment, because from time to time, students passing by saw him, and were surprised to find that he was the Gryffindor in the last Quidditch match. Invincible batsman Qin couldn't help but come over to say hello. Even Cedric Diggory came over and asked if he could sit here for a while. After getting Qin Yu's permission, he sat down excitedly and expressed his admiration for Qin Yu, and asked Qin Yu for advice on how to do it. A qualified Quidditch player. Qin Yu thought to himself, you are a seeker. Please tell me, the batter. Am I a little off track? However, in the face of enthusiastic questions from fans, Qin Yu still chose to explain patiently. After all, he had been a little jealous of Cedric's popularity before, but he did not expect that he would become the object of his admiration. This somewhat made he was a little emotional. So, Qin Yu explained to Cedric a little bit about his experience of torturing Slytherin's Seeker last time, and Cedric was able to draw inferences and try to tell some tips on how to avoid strong attacks on the court. The player's strategy made Qin Yu admire this child's talent in Quidditch. In this way, the two of them became more and more interested in talking, and they actually talked for 2 or 3 hours. "Qin, I'm really happy to talk to you so much today. Did I disturb you?" Cedric said awkwardly, looking at the westward sun. No, I'm very happy to chat with you. None of my friends have gone home for Christmas, and I'm bored. Besides, some of your ideas are very inspiring to me, but I have to tell you, I will definitely use these things in games in the future. If we meet on the court, you have to be careful," Qin Yu said to Cedric with a smile. "No problem. I will also use what I learned today in the competition. When the time comes, we will decide the outcome based on our strength," Cedric said with great fighting spirit. Advertisement: this is a very decent kid. Qin Yu made an evaluation in his heart. However, thinking about his ending, Qin Yu felt somewhat sad. Of course, this was Cedric's original ending, but it doesn't mean it's his this time. Qin Yu raised his eyebrows and added in his mind. During the rest of the trip, Qin Yu did not chase anyone away, nor did Cedric leave, because the latter felt that chatting with Qin Yu was really a pleasant thing. This first-year student, who was only 1 year younger than him, really has knowledge and wisdom far beyond his years, and at the same time has the liveliness and cheerfulness of his peers. In short, Cedric thinks Qin Yu is a nice person who speaks well and can talk to each other. Then, he really told Qin Yu a lot of his thoughts. For example, his father's expectations for him sometimes made him a little breathless, and he even buried many of his dreams because of this. Of course, he was not complaining about his father, but felt a little at a loss, fearing that he could not afford to revitalize himself. The burden of family glory. Qin Yu didn't know how to enlighten children from this kind of native family. He could only encourage him with gentle words, telling him that while working hard, he should also calm down and not be demanding in everything and do his best. "Qin, after talking to you today, I feel really relaxed. I really regret not taking the initiative to get to know you earlier." Before the train arrived at the station, Cedric held Qin Yu's hand and said with an emotional expression, there was even some crystal reflection in his eyes. "Well, I'm sorry to meet you too late," Qin Yu said seriously. This child seems to lack friends who can tell the truth. Otherwise, why would he be left alone? Qin Yu thought to himself. However, Qin Yu could feel Cedric's sincerity, and he himself felt that it was quite enjoyable to chat with the child, which at least reduced some of his fearful feelings towards home. Yes, Qin Yu felt a little uneasy as he got closer to his destination. This emotion was inexplicable. Fortunately, someone was chatting with him, which diverted his attention. The train stopped at King's Cross Station. After Cedric got off the train, he was picked up by his family. Qin Yu took the London subway and rushed to the community where he had lived for a spring and a summer. When he pulled his suitcase and appeared in front of the familiar house, a couple and a teenage girl had been waiting there for a long time. Of course, they were Mr. and Mrs. Granger and little Hermione. The owl Trig, who had long been familiar with the route, flew here first and notified the Granger family of Qin Yu's return time. Qin Yu stood there, somewhat hesitant, but Mrs. Granger did not hesitate at all. She walked over and held him in her arms, touched his head and said, "Qin, you are back. Auntie really misses you." "You." When Mrs. Granger said this, her eyes were red. Although they had only lived together for a few months, she really missed this child very much, and she really felt like she regarded him as half a son. "Aunt Jenny, I miss you too," Qin Yu said with a smile. Then, Mr. Granger also came over and hugged Qin Yu gently. Mr. Granger was not as emotional as his wife, but he was still sincerely happy for Qin Yu's return. "By the way, Hermione, haven't you been talking about Qin coming back for Christmas? Why are you silent now?" Mr. Granger said to his daughter, who was standing not far away and was extremely quiet. Hearing this, Hermione bit her lip gently and stood there timidly looking at Qin Yu. She suddenly couldn't tell between the Qin in her memory, the Qin in the letter, and the Qin in front of her eyes, which one was the real him. Qin Yu looked at this little girl who had obviously grown taller. At that moment, he seemed to feel the doubts, confusion, and timidity in her heart. Yes, the more familiar someone you think you are, the more likely it is that you will feel an indescribable feeling of strangeness after meeting again after a long absence. She was like this, and he wasn't much better. However, Qin Yu didn't want this strange feeling to exist for too long. He walked over and walked up to Hermione. The latter resisted the urge to retreat and allowed him to come closer. Then, Qin Yu gently opened his arms and looked gently at Hermione's eyes with a pair of clear eyes. Hermione's original nervousness dissipated instantly the moment she saw Qin Yu's eyes. Yes, he may have become taller. He may have become calmer. He may have experienced many wonderful things and met many interesting people, but he is still him, the same person who once encouraged her, helped her, and accompanied her. She was loved by someone she had dreamed about many times in her dreams. Thinking of this, Hermione smiled and eagerly took the step forward that she had wanted to take for a long time. Then, she threw her open arms, pressed them against Qin Yu's chest, and hugged him hard. She actually wanted to give him a hug as soon as possible more than her mother. She was even a little jealous that her mother had taken the lead. Then, she secretly decided that she would definitely be one step ahead of everyone else in the future. Any sense of strangeness, doubt, confusion, and timidity were all put aside at this moment. Of course, the same was true for Qin Yu. He held the girl in his arms, rubbed her long brown hair, and said softly, "Hermione, did you miss me?" "Yeah." Hermione nodded subconsciously, and then, thinking that he was somewhat resentful that he had only returned after half a year after leaving, she pouted again and added, "A little." Dimensional wall. I actually thought about the plot of Goodbye at Christmas for a long time and wanted to write it more delicately. However, in the end I could only write it like this. I still lacked vocabulary and limited abilities. Chapter 50. Is it not too much for two friends who have reunited after a long separation to hug each other for a short while? Qin Yu thought with a guilty conscience. After all, Mr. and Mrs. Granger were still watching. However, he did hold her for a little longer just now. The main thing was that Hermione hugged her very hard, which made him feel her inner emotions very clearly, and he didn't know how to express his emotions, so he hugged her for a while greedily. This moment more or less exceeded a certain normal threshold. However, as long as no one deliberately notices this, it's actually okay. For example, the Grangers were busy helping Qin Yu carry his luggage home and didn't pay much attention to how long they hugged him. Well, Qin Yu was really a little preoccupied. Then, Hermione happily took Qin Yu's hand and walked into the house together. She had a lot to say to Qin Yu. The Grangers and their wife looked at their daughter, who had been quiet just now and now became lively, and couldn't help but sigh. This child's mood changes really quickly. Then, there was a sumptuous dinner, and Qin Yu was very full. After dinner, Hermione and Qin Yu sat in the living room chatting. However, when it was about 9 o'clock and almost 10 o'clock, Mrs. Granger came over to remind them that it was time to take a bath and go to bed. Considering that Qin Yu needed to rest after taking the train all the way, Hermione, although a little reluctant, still let him wash up and go upstairs to sleep. Lying on the small bed in the attic, looking at the roof of the room and the surrounding layout, it was very quiet at this time, and Qin Yu suddenly felt a sense of unreality in his heart. Yes, I woke up in this room at the beginning and then experienced many things, and now I am back in this room again. Life is indeed very interesting, always drawing circles one after another. And when he returned to the starting point of this circle after experiencing all kinds of things, he had some doubts as to whether he had really experienced it all. Well, just like the sentence I once read in my previous life, life is an illusion. Of course, even if it is an hallucination, Qin Yu feels that it is at least a great hallucination. Then, he had an irresistible urge to go downstairs to see if the little girl named Hermione really lived downstairs. Fortunately, his reason told him that it was better not to be stupid at this time. Amidst all these messy thoughts, ideas, impulses, and self-complaints, Qin Yu gradually became sleepy and fell asleep at some point. And when he had not yet entered deep sleep from light sleep, he vaguely heard the sound of slight footsteps. This is a special ability brought about by his practice of meditation. Even in his sleep state, he can be aware of the surrounding environment. Then, the footsteps approached cautiously and finally stopped beside his bed. So, Qin Yu woke up from a light sleep, opened his eyes, and then saw the little girl he just wanted to see if she was still there. "Qin, can't you sleep too?" The little girl was a little excited when she saw Qin Yu wake up but did not dare to say too loudly. This was not Hermione. Who else could it be? After Qin Yu was stunned for a moment, he nodded with a smile and said, "Well, I can't sleep either." Hermione was squatting next to Qin Yu's bed, wearing a light blue pajamas, her hair simply tied into 2 braids, looking at him with bright eyes. Qin Yu sat up, reached out and touched her head and said, "Sit down." "Hey." After hearing this, the little girl happily climbed into Qin Yu's bed. The two sat side by side like they had done many times before. Then, Qin Yu pulled his quilt over and carefully covered the two of them to keep them warm. On winter nights, the room is still a little cold. Just when Qin Yu covered himself with quilt and was about to turn on the light in the room, Hermione grabbed him and stopped him. "Qin, don't turn on the light. You will be discovered by Mother. If Mother knows that I haven't slept yet, she would scold me, and she asked me not to disturb your rest." "Well, that's right. You've done neither of the two things," Qin Yu thought to himself. Seeing how nervous she was, Qin Yu took his hand back. Then, he saw Hermione pointing to his head and said with some pride, "I have this." As Hermione's fingers gently pressed somewhere above her head, a soft light shone down, driving away some of the darkness in the room, making people feel much more at ease. The thing that glowed brightly was the cat hair card Qin Yu gave her. Qin Yu still remembered that when he bought it in Diagon Alley, it cost him 10 silver coins. "Does it look good?" Hermione asked, tilting her head. "It looks good." Qin Yu looked into her eyes and said with a smile. This time it was Hermione's turn to be a little stunned, because she understood instantly that what Qin said was good-looking was not the same thing as what she asked about being good-looking. Then, she just stared at him blankly, not knowing what to say for a while, until her heartbeat began to get faster and faster, and her face began to feel a little hot. Hermione turned her head in a panic and coughed lightly. At this time, she realized that the hand she had just stretched out when she stopped Qin Yu was held by a broad hand at some point. Advertisement: "Your hands are too cold. Let me cover them for you." Feeling the urge to leave his little hands, Qin Yu said. Upon hearing this, Hermione blinked a few times and felt that his hand was indeed quite warm, so she did not break away. "So, what should we talk about?" Qin Yu spoke first, breaking the somewhat silent atmosphere at this time. I haven't thought about it either." Hermione couldn't find the topic for a while. "Okay, let me think about it. Then let me tell you the story from Professor Sprout's herb garden to Professor Snape's potion house," Qin Yu said slowly. "Yeah." Hermione nodded sharply after hearing this. From the herb garden to the potion house, it sounds very interesting, Hermione thought to herself. So, Qin Yu started from Professor Sprout's herb cultivation greenhouse and talked about his experience at Hogwarts. Of course, he must be talking about more than just Professor Sprout's herb greenhouse and Professor Snape's potion storehouse. He just said that just for fun. The herbal medicine class is actually quite fun, as long as you understand the habits of those herbs. In flying lessons, the most important thing is to find a comfortable flying position so that you can enjoy the fun of flying. Elvis once disliked flying lessons, but he slowly changed. In spells class, there are always people who want to try some weird spells, such as the spell to turn fruit juice into fruit juice. Jimmy has tried it before, but the magic he made was more like sour vinegar than fruit juice. Professor Snape, he is really an elusive man. I can't understand him. I am already very familiar with him, but he still makes me look embarrassed in class. Fortunately, I do my homework more seriously. Otherwise, Gryffindor's points wouldn't be enough for him to deduct. By the way, I'm quite unlucky. I got deducted a lot of points. Okay, you can laugh if you want. Professor Swinton in the Defense Against the Dark Arts class can hardly scare everyone anymore. Many people are used to the scary images he shows in class. Well, he has been very helpful to me. He is a very good teacher. I wonder if you have no chance to meet him. There are also transfiguration classes. Some things, Qin Yu has already written in the letter, some things have not. However, whether she had written it or not, Hermione listened very carefully, because what she heard from Qin Yu in person was more vivid and interesting than what he wrote in words in his letter. Moreover, she can interrupt at any time and ask for details. When she hears something exciting, Hermione's eyes will light up, wishing she was there at that time. When she hears something interesting, she can't help laughing, and then quickly silences her voice for fear of waking up her parents. I don't know how long it took. Hermione's hand was warmed, and then Qin Yu held the other one. When both hands were warmed, the night was already very dark. Looking at Hermione, whose eyelids were beginning to tremble, Qin Yu gradually slowed down his voice. Finally, Hermione rested her head on his shoulder and refused to raise her eyelids. Then, Qin Yu stopped talking. The room became quiet again, but this time, the silence did not give him the same sense of unreality as before, because the real Hermione was sitting next to him, sleeping soundly on his shoulder. Then, at some point, Qin Yu also fell asleep sitting there. Early the next morning, Qin Yu opened his eyes and found himself lying on the bed, and Hermione was sleeping on his chest. It was probably after he fell asleep last night that he lay down instinctively. After all, sleeping while sitting is indeed not as comfortable as lying down. Probably because his actions startled the little girl, Hermione also opened her eyes faintly. Then, She looked at Qin Yu's face with some confusion. Am I still dreaming? Hermione muttered this and reached out to pinch Qin Yu's cheek. After confirming that the feeling was real, Hermione finally woke up completely with a slightly panicked look in her eyes. Then, she quickly stood up. Qin, good morning. I'm leaving first. After saying this, the little girl went downstairs and left. During breakfast, Hermione ate the food on her plate very calmly. Then, Mr. Granger asked Qin Yu casually, Qin, how did you sleep yesterday? It's pretty good. It's quite comfortable to sleep on this bed. Qin Yu replied. Well, that's good, but even if it's a holiday, you have to develop the habit of going to bed early and getting up early. When Mr. Granger said this, he also looked at his daughter meaningfully. Huh? Dad, I was wrong. Hermione almost said this. Qin Yu almost had the same idea. Thinking about it carefully, when the two of them were chatting yesterday, their voices would inevitably be heard downstairs. It was not too surprising that Mr. Granger found them up late at night. After all, Qin Yu didn't use anything to block the sound. Spell. However, it was obvious that Mr. Granger had no intention of pursuing this issue. After reminding them to take a rest, he changed the subject. This made both Hermione and Qin Yu secretly relieved. After breakfast, the Grangers took Hermione and Qin Yu out for shopping, and the place they went to was the same large shopping mall where they bought Halloween supplies. This time I bought more things than I did for Halloween. When you come back from shopping and decorate your home, the Christmas atmosphere will immediately rise.
Thanks for watching. You can find the next videos in the playlist linked in the info card, directly on my channel, or right here on the screen. And as always, if you have any feedback, feel free to share it in the comments too.